Dr. Donna Harrison. It's an honor to sit down with you.
It's good to be here, Brian. Thank you for asking me.
Yeah. You were one of the individuals when we were putting this together. At first I thought, I actually had this like written down, and I said, well, maybe by year 2 or 3, I might be able to reach out to Dr. Donna Harrison, because I've heard you speak before, and we'll get to that a little bit later too. But I said, maybe she'd be willing to come on. And then I said, you know what, let's just reach out to her. Because of course this is early on, this thing's brand new. And you responded, I think the next day, and you said, well, I'm booked in August, I'm booked in September, but now, I can come out in October. So thank you for taking the time.
Oh, you're welcome. I think what you're doing here is so important, not just for the LCMS, but for anybody that really wants to look at issues from a different side, a little deeper dive than the sound bites.
Yeah, thank you. And this one I think is going to be, there's a lot of areas I'm very much looking forward to talking about. But first, I think it might just be helpful if you can just explain your background.
Sure.
How did you get into, and talk about a little about the position you're in as well?
So I'm Dr. Donna Harrison. I'm a board-certified obstetrician gynecologist, and I'm the previous CEO of the American Association of Pro-Life Obstetricians and Gynecologists, and I'm their current director of research. I'm also the chair of the Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine. So let me talk a little bit about American Association of Pro-Life OB-GYNs. So we are 7,000 OB-GYNs, around 7,000 across the country. And we actually have OB-GYNs and other physicians all across the world. And we are doctors who still believe in the Hippocratic Oath, which means I won't kill you or your grandma or your unborn child. And so we make available to anybody who wants to know the effects of abortion on women, because everyone knows the effects on the human being in the mom's womb, but not many people realize how bad abortion is for women. We make that information known on our website, and we also have a very convenient Find a Physician directory that you can go to on our website that will help someone who's looking for a pro-life OB-GYN find a physician.
I've used that before. We're in Carver County,
Yeah.
And I think there's a couple, but I know there's at least one here in Waconia, which is where we are. So it works, and they're all over the place.
Yeah, we're all over the place.
So how did you get into this role? So you're in undergrad, and you're thinking at this time about becoming a doctor. And at some point you moved from there to your position here.
Yeah, it's a little more complicated than that. Actually, in undergrad, I was going to be a professor, and then I met Mark, and he was headed for med school, and so I'm a doctor for love.
Mm-hmm.
I switched to becoming a physician when Mark wanted to go to medical school. So we both went. And then we had originally intended to go overseas and do medical missions. But that's not exactly the direction that life took us.
Mm-hmm.
So we split the field intensively. Mark is internal medicine, pediatrics, and infectious diseases, and I'm OB-GYN, which is sort of the female surgical type end of it, with some additional little bit of surgical training.
Mm-hmm.
So,
okay.
So then we went into private practice, and I trained at. Let me step back. I trained at University of Michigan for
Go Blue
undergrad. Yeah, Go Blue.
Yes, okay.
And then stayed in Ann Arbor for residency, St. Joseph Mercy Hospital, and then stayed in Ann Arbor an additional 2 years while my husband finished his infectious disease fellowship. And then we moved to the west side of Michigan, which is kind of a more rural area, because there's a group of docs, Southwestern Medical Clinic. It was about 50 multi-specialty docs who at any one time had a third of their physicians serving full-time overseas in mission hospitals. And then when those docs would come back on furlough, then we would be free to go short-term missions overseas. So we did that for several years. But then through a number of different circumstances, I decided to step back from private practice and to become more involved with the American Association of Pro-Life OB-GYNs. And that's a whole nother story as to, that kind of decision making as far as stepping back from practice. But at that time, I had 5 children, and they needed someone running the ship at home.
Mm-hmm.
So that allowed me to run the ship at home and also work with American Association of Pro-Life OB-GYNs. And the reason that's important is because you always wonder why there aren't more doctors involved with public policy. Well, physician life and public policy life are skew lines. And when I was first starting to get involved with American Association of Pro-Life OB-GYNs, I would get a call saying, Doc, can you be in DC in 2 days? And I would say, honey, short notice for a physician is 3 months and normal notice is 6 months. And she'd say, honey, short notice in public policy is 24 hours and normal notice is 3 days.
Wow, yeah.
So that's why you just can't do it. So the world is run by those who show up. So it actually took me stepping back from private practice to be able to be there and available to show up.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I did that, I saw the huge need for some accurate information about abortion specifically for policymakers, because they were getting very inaccurate information about what abortion is and what it does to women. And so that was the unique role that American Association of Pro-Life OB-GYNs could play in the public policy arena, is to give accurate information about what abortion is and what it does to women.
Do you think a lot of what takes place on certainly the legislative side, but even just kind of the way that the population understands this subject, is a lot of it just misinformation or the lack of information? Is that one of the key issues, you think?
Yes, I think it's a deliberate spin of reality, and especially in the lived observation of an OB-GYN, what you see is women hurt by abortion. What you get in the marketing, and remember, a lot of what comes to the public is marketed information. It's information that's put out by the abortion industry to increase the uptake of abortion. It's all marketing.
Mm-hmm.
And so you get this idea that, abortion is safer than Tylenol. And the real reality is women are hurt by abortion. And they're hurt in a number of different ways. And the hurt is long-standing. I mean, as an example, if you look at women who have unplanned, unwanted pregnancies, and you compare the outcomes of women who have unwanted, unplanned pregnancies who abort versus those who have unwanted, unplanned pregnancies who carry to term, what you find is the women who abort have an increased risk of suicide, drug abuse, and hospitalizable depression.
Wow.
They have a real grief, a real loss that they can't acknowledge. Whereas women who bring that unwanted, unplanned pregnancy to birth, in general, over half of them find that they are glad later that they didn't have an abortion. And they are glad for that child who's now a part of their life. So it's a difference between a resolution that brings good and hope and life, and a resolution that breathes despair into this woman's life.
And you're saying when you actually just look at the studies and look at the numbers that are tracking these kind of things, that kind of statement that abortion's as easy as Tylenol, it doesn't stand up at all. But a lot of people aren't looking at the actual numbers. They're not looking at the studies that are taking place. They're not seeing what you see as an OBGYN, and therefore they're just they don't have a proper understanding of the real conversation at hand.
Right. And they're not, this conversation requires a woman to have some trust with the person she's talking to. So your average person on the street, you're not going to go up to them and say, do you regret your abortion? I mean, why should she tell you? Mm-hmm. This is something deep and close to her heart. And so if you get to the point where you can actually talk to your friends about, well, what was it like for you? What you see, even in stories that are published on the internet, people who say, oh yeah, shout your abortion, but read the stories. I was desperate. I had no hope. I had no support. I had no one to walk beside me in this. And that's the woman who aborts. She's in a tough spot and without support. So abortion's abandonment. Abortion is not empowerment. It's abandonment. And these women are generally in situations where significant people in their lives have abandoned them at a time when they need extra support. So I had the pivotal experience for me as a private practice doc is I had a patient who had an unplanned pregnancy, surprise pregnancy, and she was in my office and said basically that she was going to abort. And I said, please bring in your significant other and let's make sure you're pregnant, okay? Mm-hmm. You've got a positive pregnancy test, but let's do an ultrasound, make sure you haven't miscarried, make sure the baby's not ectopic, that is growing in your tubes, and then let's talk. So she brought in her significant other, and the baby performed well. waving, that
Mhm.
kind of thing, about 10 weeks, fully formed. And so I said to her, I'm just going to call her Jane. That's not her name.
Mhm.
I said, Jane, I'm really happy for you. Here's your child. What can I do to make this easier for you? And she said, well, Dr. Harrison, I've raised a child before. I have a 13-year-old that I raised all by myself. And I can't do it alone. And Fred in the corner said, nothing. I said, okay, so Jane, so what you're telling me is if you had someone that could walk with you through this pregnancy and raise the child and be with you, that you'd carry this child. She said, Dr. Harrison, I can't do this alone. I've done it once. I can't do it alone. And Fred said, nothing.
Oh, my goodness.
And I am not a patient person. I finally said, Fred, hello, put down your book and look at me. I said, did you hear what Jane said to you? And he said, well, it's her body. It's her choice. And he picked up his book. And that was the end. Fred killed his child because he wasn't willing to be there with Jane. When Jane needed him, she needed a promise of faithfulness.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually why it's so important to have that promise of faithfulness before you allow yourself to be in a situation where you can get pregnant.
Yeah.
And it wasn't there. And so Jane later came back to me because I saw her. She didn't go back to the abortionist for the post-abortive exam. She came back to me because she's my patient. And she said, Dr. Harrison, that's the worst thing I ever did. And she said, why didn't you try harder to talk me out of it?
Mm.
I mean, I did spend about 45 minutes with her, but that never left me. So I'm in practice thinking, why didn't I try harder? And part of it was, at that time, I didn't know how bad abortion was for women. I couldn't tell her what I know now. Jane, if you abort, you're going to increase your chances of suicide, drug abuse, and hospitalizable depression. Jane, if you abort, you're going to increase your chances that you can never carry a baby all the way to term again. Because women who have surgical abortions have an increased risk of damaging their cervix so that they end up with very premature babies, babies on the edge of life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an increased risk that comes from surgical abortion. There's 170 studies over 5 decades that have shown that. There are zero studies that show that abortion improves a woman's chance of carrying a baby to term. Okay, zero. So you've got settled science that it damages her fertility long term.
Mm-hmm.
And you have the risk if she's never had a child before, okay, she aborts her first child, and then she delays having another child, bringing a child to term, she has an increased risk of developing breast cancer. And the reason for that is that in going from a never pregnant breast to a breast that makes milk, in that first pregnancy, you got a whole bunch of growth of breast tissue. That's the breast tenderness that you feel.
Mm-hmm.
That tissue that has grown and increased is type 1 and 2 tissue. It's a stem cell type tissue. It's immature. It hasn't what we call terminally differentiated, meaning it hasn't reached its final telos. And the final telos of breast cells is to make milk. Once you have matured the breast to making milk, that milk-producing cells are cancer resistant. And that's why the whole world knows and agrees that the single most important factor in breast cancer risk is actually the age at first term pregnancy. So if you lose a child for any reason before 32 weeks, and that could be an auto accident, that could be abruption, could be an infection. If you lose a child before 32 weeks, your first pregnancy, you've never brought a pregnancy to term, you've just arrested your breast in a state where the majority of the breast tissue is cancer susceptible.
Really?
So your risk of breast cancer then depends on when you bring a subsequent pregnancy to term. Because at term, 95% of the breast tissue is cancer resistant. At 32 weeks, half the breast tissue is cancer resistant. So in this country, it's not auto accidents or abruptions that cause women to lose babies. In this country, it's abortion. So abortion has a lot of consequences. And if you look at a first abortion, Okay, let's look at women who are making that decision. I'm pregnant, never been pregnant before. Am I going to abort or am I going to carry to term? My research team just did a study looking at 7 million women in the Medicaid database. Okay. And we looked at first pregnancy outcomes. Okay. And we said, how does that first pregnancy outcome affect the rest of their reproductive life? And it turns out that women who have a first pregnancy outcome that's an abortion, a third of them never ever have a term pregnancy. They never have a child.
How would that compare to the normal public?
Well, if you look at women whose first pregnancy outcome is a birth, over half of them never have an abortion. So that first pregnancy outcome kind of sets a trajectory. Abortion begets abortion and birth begets birth. And it's really interesting to me that Planned Parenthood focuses their marketing at women who are young, first pregnancy outcomes, because they know if they get them hooked on an abortion, it is more likely that they will have a subsequent abortion for their reproductive needs.
It's the same way of getting someone addicted to drugs, where they're going to come back and they're going to do it again, likely.
Well, probably not as... Yeah, I hadn't thought of it in terms of drugs.
Yeah.
But in terms of the damage that it causes to a woman in her reproductive life, which is an important part of a woman's life, tends to make it more difficult for her to then bond to subsequent children and bring subsequent children to term. So it's a first hit damage that has long lasting reproductive consequences for women. So there's lots of consequences for women, and I just wish that women knew that when they walk into the abortion clinic or when abortion is pushed on them as a solution. American Association of Pro-Life OB-GYNs has looked at the effects of abortion on women in the peer-reviewed medical literature for 50 years. We've been here for 50 years, ever since Roe versus Wade. And what we want to do is to make sure that every woman is aware of really what her risks are. And if you're going to choose that, know the damage that you're bringing into your life by choosing that route.
Yeah. You're talking about some of the physical ones. We were talking even earlier about just the emotional damage as well. You mentioned the story of hypothetical Jane and hypothetical Fred, right? So this Jane has now gone back to her house or her apartment, and she has no support. She doesn't have a husband. Who knows what other areas of life she has support for. But now she has to wrestle with what she's just articulated to you as, I've got a big regret of a big decision that I made. And now she doesn't have any support, and she's got to deal with the guilt, with the physical trauma, with the voices in her head that say, well, maybe you won't be able to be pregnant again. All of these things now she is put in a position where she doesn't have any support group and she's left alone. And that is devastating. And the fact that there are groups within the United States that are pushing for this as a roadway for empowerment and women's health, it's the antithesis of what women's health would be.
It's the antithesis. That's a really good way of putting it. It's the antithesis of women's health, and it's the antithesis of empowerment, because you've left somebody psychologically damaged. You've left somebody with a grief that they know is a grief that is unresolved. And if you look at how do people handle grief, they can have a resolved grief. It still hurts, but they get to the point where it doesn't interfere with daily life functioning. Or you can have a complicated grief, where the grief is so unresolved that it does interfere with daily functioning. And that's what the studies of women, when you look at the mental health consequences, that's why women have an increased use of drugs. It's a self-medication to deal with a complicated grief. It's a way of trying to master something that they know in their heart, but in their head, why should I be grieving a blob of tissue? They know in their heart, that's my baby. And he would have been born on such and such a date, and he'd be 12 years old now. He'd be 17 years old now. Women never forget. I've had women in my office who had abortions 20 years earlier were saying, I've never told anybody, but I think of him every day. It's the kind of thing where women know their kids and they grieve them, even if nobody else knows. And the difficulty with abortion, like So I've miscarried 3 times
Mm-hmm.
and had the loss of a child. There are support groups for women who miscarry. There are support groups for women who've lost children. There actually are support groups for women who abort, but it's the women who abort tend not to see them or know about them. So there's Rachel's Vineyard. There's a number of different after-abortion support groups that can help a woman to recover and to get to the point of healing. But we just need to make that more known because there's a lot of women who are hurting and they think they're alone, and we need to get them the healing that they need.
Well, you can just play out the difference. So when we were at breakfast this morning, that's where you mentioned, you said, I've had 3 miscarriages. I've lost a child. And that's something that, you can talk about the wounds of that certainly an hour later, you can talk about that story. But for you to talk to me about that after 45 minutes of knowing each other, that's a very natural thing to do, especially if that topic comes up. To whereas for somebody who has had an abortion, in order for them to have the abortion beforehand, they have to justify and they have to say, this is an okay thing for me to do. They have to, in their mind, say, this is not a baby, right? And then the support group and negative support group, right? Those who are advocating for abortion, those who are part of Planned Parenthood, they're preaching that type of thinking. This is not a baby. This is just, as you said, a glob of tissue, right? So now a year passes. And as you said, that mother knows what that child was, right? It's in her instinct, right? You can't lie against nature for very long. So now she's in that situation where she has the same hurt, the same types of scars as someone that would have lost a child. The difference is she's not going to sit down after 45 minutes with me and say, by the way, let me tell you about this, because she's got a world of guilt. And by the way, the people that were supporting her at first, now they're going to lash out at her if she starts to change her mindset and say, well, actually, I do think this is a baby. Now, I know that I profess that I said this when I got my abortion, but I've changed that. So she feels completely alone. And I mean, what was it? The Vineyard, Rachel's
Vineyard. Yes.
God bless the organizations that are doing that, because I can't think of people that would be more broken and lonely and that feel less empowered than someone who's in a situation like that, where they have these deep scars and they feel alienated from being able to talk about that with anyone that could help them or support them.
Well, that's exactly right. And so the abortion industry paints pro-life people as, some caricature of, not compassionate. Most of the people that I know in the pro-life movement have experienced loss. Some of them have had abortions in the past. They've walked the route. They know what it takes to recover. And I just would encourage any woman that's listening who's had an abortion, please reach out to Rachel's Vineyard or just Google post-abortion recovery and find someone to talk to, because there's lots of us who are available to talk, who have walked through grief and can help. And that will put you in a whole different space than where that, you might be right now.
And can they find that on the AAPLOG? Can they find those resources?
You probably won't find it on AAPLOG.org, although that's a great idea. And so maybe next week you'll be able to find it.
If that changes, certainly let us know. But one thing we will do, we'll talk afterwards, and we'll put a list of resources in the description of at least the YouTube one. So if you're watching on Spotify or something else, if you go to our YouTube, in the description, we'll put a list of all of these resources that you recommend.
That'd be great. That'd be great. I would just encourage women, if you've had an abortion, reach out. There's healing, there's recovery, and you can be in a different spot than you are now.
So let's talk about some of the battle that's taking place, right? And some of the different narratives, the different facts or anti-facts that are floating around and such, and try to get some clarity around starting with the abortion industry. So, I mean, I guess an easy question is, first off, what is abortion?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. I actually do have a PowerPoint slide. If you think you can pull up the slide, that'd be great.
Here's where Bennett gets to flap his wings.
We had a very interesting experience happen with Dobbs. First of all, I don't think anybody in the circles that I circulated with ever thought that we would see the end of Roe versus Wade. I don't think we ever thought. But when the Supreme Court returned the decision to the states, we were ready. We have 50 years of what abortion does to women. We were ready to paper up and go against the abortion industry and say, okay, We'll show you our studies. You show us your studies because we know they don't have them. Okay. And we were ready for that. And instead, what we got was absolute medical insanity. We had people saying, well, no, you can't get ectopic pregnancy treatment. What are you talking about? I trained at a Catholic health institution that didn't do abortions. We did excellent ectopic care, and all the pro-life docs know how to take care of an ectopic pregnancy. Well, you can't get treatment for a miscarriage. What are you talking about? We did excellent miscarriage treatment. And the difference between an elective abortion and a miscarriage is that in a miscarriage, the baby's died. In an elective abortion, the purpose of an elective abortion is to produce a dead baby. And if your doctor can't tell the difference between a dead baby and a living baby, you need a different doctor.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the point. So miscarriage care has nothing to do with elective abortion. Ectopic treatment has nothing to do with elective abortion. So I wanted to, if we can get the slide up there, I wanted to just talk about what elective abortion is, because this was made evident to us as we walked through the partial birth abortion hearings in years ago. Gonzalez v. Carhart was the decision, and in the process of debating the partial birth abortion, the abortionists were asked, look, you've got a living baby. You've brought the baby down until only the head is left inside the vaginal canal. Why don't you just do a delivery? And the abortionist said, because the product we're paid to produce is a dead baby.
Lord have mercy.
Lord have mercy. That is the product of an elective abortion. The purpose and product of an elective abortion is to guarantee that the human being in the womb doesn't make it out alive. And that's what the procedures are designed to do. So, okay, so I'm going to just start here.
Real quick, because I just want to give this as an example, because I think you'll speak to this, but just in case you weren't going to speak directly to, you hinted towards some of these misconceptions that were being certainly perpetrated. But I've got a good friend, and I watched a debate with him and another good friend over this, and there was a little bit of a falling out. But this one friend was, he was very worried about the Roe v. Wade overturning. He was very worried about his significant other, and very worried about her safety when it came to childbearing, which was coming up. They're planning on marriage and all of that. And he very much had this idea in his mind that things like ectopic pregnancy, or things like her being able to, they weren't, I don't think they were by any means planning on aborting a child, but that she would even have the proper care to have a healthy process of taking a child to term. He was very much under the assumption that in his state, which is more of a conservative state after Roe v. Wade, that his wife or his significant other was going to be in real danger because of this. And you're saying this is not a gray area, that's just completely 100% false?
It's completely 100% false. And I appreciate that he would be afraid, because that's what the media has perpetuated. That's the what's being paid, to be put out.
It came from a good place, as you said. He was concerned for.
Right. It comes from a good place, but it's 100% false. And let me give you an illustration. Catholic hospital systems who don't do abortions are 1/5 of the hospital systems in the country. They do excellent ectopic care. They do excellent miscarriage care. They have OB-GYN training programs, of which I trained there. An OB-GYN is trained to empty a uterus at any gestational age. We just don't empty a uterus for social reasons. So the difference between an OB-GYN emptying a uterus and an abortionist doing an abortion is an OB-GYN empties a uterus for a medical reason. An abortionist does an abortionist for a social reason. Somebody wants that baby dead, and they want the baby not to make it out of the womb. Okay, that's the product of an elective abortion. And in the courts, it's clear that is the product of an elective abortion. So when you have people being told that they're not going to get miscarriage care, they're not going to get, it's complete, outright, absolute lie. It's an absolute lie. There's no evidence of that whatsoever. So let me just talk a little bit, and then I'll get more into this saving the life of the mother, because it's a really important discussion. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, and we'll cover a little bit of this here. So abortion is an old term. I mean, we've had the term abortion, and it medically means the loss of a pregnancy for any reason prior to 20 weeks. That's what it used to mean before Roe versus Wade. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So if you had a baby die from an auto accident at 14 weeks, that was called a spontaneous abortion. Okay. Because the abortion was just a term that was differentiating from birth. Birth happened after 20 weeks. Abortion happened before 20 weeks.
Is that still the case?
No. So there's multiple. So I'm going to go through it now.
Can I share something real quick?
Yeah.
So, as we shared with you, we've had a miscarriage as well.
Yeah.
And this was very recently, and they used the term abortion.
Right.
And my wife was not very happy about that. But so at least our doctor was still using that term.
Yes. And if you look at the coding, because every procedure and every diagnosis is put into the system as a code. Yes. Spontaneous abortion, there's a bunch of different codes that can be used, but they all have the term abortion because historically, back in the day, abortion meant the loss of any pregnancy for any reason prior to 20 weeks.
Okay.
And birth was after. And so you'd get stillbirth versus miscarriage.
Yes, makes sense.
All right. So anyway, this is the definition of abortion. Merriam-Webster, it's a pretty good definition. The termination of a pregnancy after, accompanied by, resulting in, or closely followed by the death of the embryo or fetus. And again, the thought prior to Roe versus Wade is that is before 20 weeks. Okay. Mm-hmm. But we'll just go with it now. So go ahead. It's two important aspects we have to look at. One is the separation of the mother and the fetus. And the second is the death of the fetus. Both of those are components of abortion. Okay. So let's look at separation of mother and fetus. The separation of the mother and the fetus can happen spontaneously. That means with no human intervention. Okay. She spontaneously separates, miscarriage. Mm-hmm. Or it can be induced. So the separation can happen because of human intervention. Right? Those are the two options. Let's take the next. Okay. Why would you separate? So stop right there just a second. We can induce a separation of the mother and the fetus to save the life of the mother, or to save the life of the fetus, or to save the life of at least one of them. And if it's before 20 weeks, we can't save the life of the fetus. So there are circumstances where if the mom continues the pregnancy, she will die, as best we can tell. And in those cases, we separate. Because if we don't, we lose mom and baby. If we do, we lose baby and hopefully save mom. We prefer to call those premature parturitions or pre-viable parturitions. Viability just meaning, can the baby survive outside the womb or not?
Can I ask a question on that before you go to the next one? So the pro-life movement, right, that you're involved in and everything, the pro-life movement honors that.
Always.
So any idea that the pro-life movement would say you can't intervene when it comes to an ectopic pregnancy, you can't, or separate is the term you're using here, right? But that's not the pro-life movement.
That's not the pro-life movement. Ask any pro-life OB-GYN. Mm-hmm. Okay. And we have important papers on our website. If you look up AAPLOG.org, go to the face page, you'll see resources, practice guidelines. We talk about this. Our practice guideline 10 talks about ending a pregnancy ethically. Okay. And fortunately, most of the circumstances that force separating the mom because pregnancy will continuing the pregnancy will risk her life, most of them happen after the baby is already old enough to survive. Mm-hmm. So we separate them by vaginal birth or C-section. Mm-hmm. It's a no-brainer. It's fewer that happen before the baby's able to survive, but they still happen. And every single OB-GYN has faced making this decision. Every single pro-life OB-GYN has faced making this decision, and we save the life of the mother. We separate because if we don't, we lose both mom and baby. And if we do, we can save at least one of them. Mm-hmm. So yes, there's no issue of separating, of that decision. It shouldn't be an issue at all.
That is such a mischaracterization. As I'm talking about, I could give you more than certainly one example. I could give you almost everyone I talk to that is from a pro-choice background. Immediately they start with that assumption.
And it's a completely inaccurate assumption. So I would encourage somebody who says that, I would say, okay, show me the statistics that there have been more women dying at Catholic hospitals than in the hospitals that do abortions. Well, they can't, because they don't, because Catholic hospitals give excellent care. And I'm not just saying that. I'm not Catholic. I'm Lutheran, okay? But looking at, if you want a real life example, if that were true, then you would expect a pile of dead bodies at Catholic hospitals. That's not what you see. What you see is excellent medical care at Catholic hospitals, because we separate when the mom's life is in danger by continuing the pregnancy and the baby is not able of the gestational age to survive outside. We separate, because otherwise you lose mom and baby, as opposed to we know we'll lose baby. And when we do that kind of separation, we are cognizant of the fact that that mom and dad need the baby's body to hold and care for. If at all possible, we try to bring that baby out intact so that we can wrap the baby, they can have a photograph, they can do footprints, they can hold the baby, the brothers and sisters can hold the baby. We treat that baby as the human being that baby is. That baby in the womb, that human being in the womb, is already a son or daughter, a grandson, a granddaughter, a brother, sister. And that doesn't change even though they die. There's still that relationship that needs to be grieved. How can you grieve a pile of arms and legs? It's much, much harder. So we try to be cognizant of not only saving the mom's life, but what is going to allow her the best chance of recovering from the kind of grief that the family's going to feel at the death of this sibling, at the death of this child. So it's all part of good medical care. And that's all part of being a pro-life doc. Okay? We face the hard things and we make those decisions. We make them to produce life, okay? To give as much life as we can out of a bad situation.
That seems entirely reasonable. There's nothing in there that should be controversial by any means. But
I agree with you. And that's why we were so surprised at the flood of blinding snow that came out in the media after Dobbs. It was amazing. So there is another reason to induce, and that is for the purpose of producing a dead baby, elective induced abortion. And let me illustrate this with an example. You're at 32 weeks. What do you call a 32-week abortion? I mean, it's not a birth. If the baby survives that 32-week abortion, it's a failed abortion. The separation did not fail to occur. What failed to occur is the baby failed to die. Okay? It's very clear that what you're doing is you're doing a surgical or, drug-induced procedure for the purpose of ending the life of that baby. So when we talk about abortion, we talk about abortion in our practice bulletin, practice guideline 10. Abortion, as people know it today, as we use the term, is really elective induced abortion. That is intentional feticide, the intentional destruction of the human being in the womb to make sure the baby doesn't make it out alive. Right? And once you understand that concept, everything else becomes very, very clear. What most people in the pro-life movement are saying is that we don't want to kill people for social reasons. It's not the way you handle a social problem. You don't handle a social problem with surgery. You don't handle it with genocide. You handle a social problem with a social solution that respects the dignity and the life of every human being. And the fact that there's a human being in the womb is undeniable scientifically. From the moment of sperm-egg membrane fusion, you have a living entity that has its own self-directed behavior. Its DNA directs its own trajectory of growth. It has separate circulatory system. It has separate brainwaves. Has a different sex. I mean, you got a male baby and a female mom. It's very clear these are different human beings. So the issue that you get is, well, I can do, the pro-choice mantra of I can do what I want with my own body. The problem is your body ends where that baby's body begins.
Mm-hmm.
And so we now have two human beings that we deal with. And every OB-GYN knows this. In fact, classic OB-GYN textbooks used to begin with, the obstetrician has the great joy of dealing with two patients, the mother and the fetus in her womb. So it's just becomes much clearer when we look at what elective induced abortion really is to know what is the civil rights issue of our time. It's do we have the love to be able to extend that love and protection to the human beings that are in the womb? Or are we going to say there's some human beings that are more deserving of life than other human beings?
Mm-hmm.
That's the social issue before us in abortion.
Yeah. Well, we've taken that stance before in our history, and those are chapters in history we don't want to repeat. So when I'm looking at this graph, the one thing that stands out to me is there's nothing about the bottom right box, which for those that are just listening and can't see, the bottom right box is as you go through all of this, there's the separation of the mother and fetus.
Right.
There's the time where you have to do that in order to maybe save the mother if it's certainly prior to that 20 weeks. The bottom right is, this is just for the intention of producing a dead baby.
That's correct.
Right? That's the, as you said, elective induced abortion. There's nothing about that box that has anything to do with health care for the mother, correct?
That is correct. And let me expound a little bit on the term health, okay? Because we all know about Roe versus Wade, the trimester system. States can't make any laws in the first trimester. They can make some laws for the life of the mother in the second trimester, and they can make some laws for the potential life or health of the baby in the third trimester, potential life, okay? But all of those had a health exception, okay? States can't make any laws that would violate the health of the mother. Well, what does health mean? The same day that Roe versus Wade was decided, the same day the court issued a second decision called Doe versus Bolton. And Doe versus Bolton defined health for the purposes of abortion law. Health is any physical, psychological, financial, social, or any other reason.
Oh, wow.
So it was actually Doe versus Bolton that allowed for the killing of human beings in the womb up to the point of birth, because all of those were considered health. So when you talk about life of the mother regulations versus health of the mother regulations, you have to understand Doe. Doe defines health as any reason. So anything can be put on
financial,
social, familial, woman's age, anything that pertains to her well-being. And if you look up well-being equals health, and health equals well-being. They're synonymous. Okay. So this is it's brilliant. You got to admit it is brilliant, but it is designed for the purpose of allowing abortion for any reason up till the time of birth.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I caution the health, and why when people say, well, pro-life people don't care about the health of the woman. Yeah, of course we care about the health of the woman. That's why we went into OB-GYN, is because we care about the health of women. But health does not mean because I want to be not pregnant or I want this baby dead. And ultimately, that's not going to serve her health, okay? So we don't take this broad, expansive definition that health is everything.
Mm-hmm.
We take and look at the disease, what is going to cause the well-working of her body and her mind for the longest period of time while she's alive. And abortion does not improve women's health.
And you've already laid out a lot of physical ways.
Right.
Breast cancer. You can go into the psychological, depression, drug use,
preterm
suicide.
birth, suicide.
Mm-hmm.
All of these things are what can happen to a woman who chooses abortion.
Mm-hmm.
And can I take just a minute?
Yes,
because
please.
This whole idea of the whole idea that somehow abortion is a choice that has to be available to women. If you ever want to read and weep, Google reasons women abort. I didn't have enough money. I had 3 kids and I had nobody with me. I was going to lose my job. My parents were going to kick me out. My boyfriend wanted the abortion. Is that empowerment? That's coercion. That's coercion. That's financial, social coercion. These are not medical reasons. And many women who have abortions have been coerced, forced one way or the other to take this as opposed to another option. Again, the whole lie that somehow abortion is benefiting women, that's not what plays out. And when you Google reasons women abort, you'll often get pro-abortion websites that have done the studies. Okay, it's very clear that these are women in a difficult and sometimes desperate situation. And the abortion industry breathes despair. You can't do it. You're not strong enough. You got to take this way out. And in contrast to that, the pregnancy resource centers breathe hope. Mm-hmm. We're there with you. We'll walk through this. It's your decision. We'll walk it with you. If you want to keep this baby, we'll make it as easy as possible for you to keep this baby. We'll help you. We're there for you. We want you and your baby to live. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the dichotomy that you see. The women who abort are not, by and large, are women who don't see any other way out of it. I think it was Frederica Matthews Green, I believe is her name, a lawyer, who said women don't want abortion like they want an ice cream cone. Women choose abortion the way a rabbit chews off its leg when it's in a trap. Okay, that is the real picture of what abortion does to women. It's presented in this sugar-coated way by the abortion industry, who profits as, blob of tissue, 10 minutes in, you're done. You're not done. Okay, it's with you always. It changes your life. See, this is the thing. When a woman becomes pregnant, she's a mom. She only has two possibilities. She'll be the mom of a living baby, or she'll be the mom of a dead baby, but she will always be a mom. Mm-hmm. Always. And that doesn't change whether the baby dies or lives. You're still a mom. And moms grieve the loss of their babies. So we have to look at the woman who's aborted in a little different way. She's not the problem. The problem is the abortion industry that preys on vulnerable women at points of desperation.
That's a powerful shift of perspective of a mother is a mother. The question is, what's her story going to be moving forward, right?
Yep.
I think another, as you're talking, we have a local place. It's one of our mission partners here at Trinity called Incratia House of Hope, mm-hmm. and they're right down, within the area here. And so just to kind of paint two different pictures, right, of what would be considered media-wise or public-wise champions of women, right? Something like Planned Parenthood that convinces a woman that's in a very difficult situation to come in, to terminate a life, their own child's
and
pay them, and they will make a lot of money off of the whole aspect, right, off this whole diabolical process. And then they're going to send them out into the world to be on their own. So that's one. And for some reason, these are the ones that are championed as those that are standing up for women's rights and women's health and all of this kind of stuff, empowerment. Now we've got Incratia House of Hope down the road. What does Incratia House of Hope do? Well, they access those same women and they say, listen, if you have your child, if you don't go the abortion route, you can come live in this house. We'll feed you. We'll give you a room. We'll give you a safe place. And we'll teach you life skills, because a lot of these women don't have jobs. So we'll teach you life skills so that when the baby is 9 months or so, we'll prepare you for leaving our place. So you can stay for a year and a half if you would like. And when you leave, we've trained you. We've actually empowered you to be a mother, and to not only be a mother, but to help you find a vocation even beyond the mother, to help with that vocation. Which one is championing women? Which one is sweating? Which one is working hard? Which one is sacrificing of themselves on behalf of a woman? And it should just be so obvious. But Incratia House of Hope does not have a multi-billion-dollar, and I don't know what Planned marketing firm, right, trying to shift the opinions of the public.
Right. Oh, you got it.
Let me give you one other thought that came up. So you mentioned, and I just want to clarify here.
Yeah.
When you mentioned, you said, okay, no longer one, but two, right? So the mother has a baby. So no longer is it just the health of the mother because the baby is It's got its own DNA. So when you said that, you're saying medically speaking, objectively speaking, and scientifically speaking, the baby is not it. The baby is its own being.
Right.
Do you want to clarify or put that the right way?
Baby is a human, not a pig or a dog or a pine tree.
Yeah.
Never seen a woman birth a pine tree.
Yeah.
Okay. They birth humans. Baby's human, and it's a being. It's an organism by scientific definition of an organism. Self-directed behavior, continuous existence. One continuous existence from the moment of sperm membrane fertilization until the point of death. There's one continuous traceable existence through the cells dividing. It's not other cells coming in and, it's the same cells dividing to make this being, a self-contained, self-directed being. So there's no question that it's a human being. The only question is, are we going to count that human being in our circle of people that we care about? Mm-hmm. Who's our neighbor? Okay. And the very slippery term, people in general don't realize that the term person is a legal term. If you look up the legal definition of person, it's human being or corporation. Both of them can be legal persons. Okay. Mm-hmm. So every human being should be protected as a person. Okay? But we don't do that. We say, oh, you're not a person until you're born. Well, what were you 5 minutes before? Well, what were you a week before? Mm-hmm. You were a what? You're a human being. What I would say is that the civil rights challenge of our time is to say every human being is a person. Every human being deserves the legal protection of having a right to life, having a right to bodily integrity. When you shred the baby inside the womb, you're not giving them bodily integrity. Mm-hmm. So the question, and I've seen this happen, oh my goodness, so interesting. There was a congressional hearing, and I believe it was Mark Wayne Mullen, who asked the Planned Parenthood doctor. The hearing was about abortion. He said, "Well, doctor, what is an abortion?" And she said, "Well, it's a procedure to make a woman not pregnant." He said, "Well, so is a C-section an abortion?" Okay, no. Well, what differentiates an abortion from a birth? She said, "I'm not going to answer that question. That's a political question. You're just asking that to make me mad." He said, "Doctor, you're here to testify in a hearing about an abortion, and you can't tell me the difference between an abortion and a birth?" "Well, I'm not going to answer that. You're just asking me, to make me." They will not answer that question.
Wow.
Because the difference is to know an abortion is intentionally killing the human being in the womb. Mm-hmm. And it's clear as day. But so if you ultimately talk to somebody about what the choice is that they're so pro-choice about, what is this choice? It comes down to, what is this entity? What is this thing that's being removed? I mean, actually, I hate to break it to you, Brian, but you are actually just a blob of tissue. And so am I. Okay, we're all blobs of tissue, in the same way that a fetus is a blob of tissue. Okay?
Yeah.
So what is this entity, and are we going to protect this human being? Small, vulnerable? Are we going to protect all human beings? Are we going to say they all have a place in our human family? That's what the issue is for abortion. Abortion is a violation of that protection of other human beings because they're small and vulnerable and in a place that nobody can see.
Maybe you want to comment on this, maybe you won't, because this is more of a maybe a philosophical kind of analysis of culture. But so my wife pointed out, I can't remember if she saw that, I think she watched this, or maybe someone had directed her to this, but it was Beyonce, okay, pop artist Beyonce, and she was on stage at some, I don't even know what these, what's an example of a Hollywood celebration event where they get awards and stuff. Like a VMA? Maybe a VMA. I don't know what that is. Yeah, Emmys, or I don't know what. Right. No, Emmy Sports, I think. Anyway, she's up there receiving one of these awards, and she's pregnant at the time. And there's some kind of dialogue between her and whoever, like the host at the point is, and they make this kind of moving remark of, or should I say both of you? Right.
Ooh.
And of course, Beyonce is all for that. This host is for that. And everyone, in this Hollywood crowd, none of them, I'm sure, are, who knows, but they're all applauding this and whatnot. So that was a good emotional moment where they were fully ready to say, this baby that's in Beyonce's belly is already a child. It's already here. There's two of you up here. Once again, completely reasonable thing. Anybody who's not thinking of, I need to be really pro-choice in this moment, everyone looking at that situation says, well, of course there's a baby in your belly, right? Once again, completely reasonable. Right. It's reasonable even in the heart of Hollywood, right? That's what's part of reality itself. Yeah. And your point is, when it comes to medical terminology and medical science, as obvious as can be, and yet those same people can shift very quickly and say, but this baby's not. Why do you think that is? Do you think there's a comfortability with a subjectivizing? What is that?
So I've been pondering that. I've been pondering that for a long time. And my conclusion is that elective abortion rests on 4 legs, okay? Like the legs of a chair. Mm-hmm. The first one is, it's just a blob of tissue. And you might have been able to get away with that in 1973. Okay, we didn't have good ultrasound. I trained in the era when ultrasound was becoming, the right arm of the OB-GYN physician. So now when people text ultrasound pictures at 6 weeks and say, "Hi, Grandma," nobody believes this is a blob of tissue. Mm-hmm. It's just crazy. So that leg has kind of gone away. The chair still stands. Okay. The second leg is, it's good for women. No, it's actually horrible for women. And American Association of Pro-Life OB-GYNs has spent 50 years proving that it's horrible for women. So that leg, if you look at it carefully and you look at it objectively, goes away. But there's 2 other legs that stand. One of them is illustrated by a salon interview that Ruth Bader Ginsburg gave years ago. And she was being asked about Roe versus Wade because she was on the court then. And she says, well, I was kind of surprised that the court went as far as it did. There was an issue of Medicaid funding, and we thought that abortion was going to be the solution to the problem of Medicaid. I just about dropped my jaw that she actually admitted that part of the reason for the funding of abortion, or for the decision for abortion, was because of a concern about too many poor people. So it's easier to abort them. And as an illustration of that, if you look up Jonathan Gruber from MIT, he did a monograph. He was part of the commission looking at the Affordable Health Care Act, and he did a monograph saying how much abortion had saved the federal government in welfare payments. Okay, so this intrigued me. So I looked into where this comes from. What in the world is going on here? And it turns out that way back in the 40s and 50s, you have a very powerful group of funders, John D. Rockefeller, I believe the third, who started the Population Council. And they were pushing this idea that there's too many people and we're all going to starve by by the year 2000. And so we need to act now to decrease the population. And they were deeply involved in federal policy, federal population control policy. And unfortunately, well, let me give the readers or the listeners a couple of websites to look at. Okay. Mm-hmm. Google the Kissinger memorandum. The Kissinger memorandum. Mm. It was a white paper, Henry Kissinger.
Yeah.
And he talked about the U.S. security need for population control. And toward the end of that big document, which looked at global resources that we needed to secure in developing countries and how the growth of the populations in those developing countries were a threat to U.S. Access to the resources. Oh my goodness, unpack that one. But anyway, toward the end of that monograph, he says, and no country has ever controlled its population except with abortion. And then he goes on to talk about the need for abortion. This is 1974. It's right after. Well, that thought actually became part of the report that he created was actually part of the international push for USAID. So the point behind USAID was to give funding to those countries that were willing to decrease their populations.
Oh, wow.
It's ugly. It's so ugly. It just makes me cry. I love this country, but sometimes I just can't believe some of the things that were going on. Anyway, that memo was declassified in 1989. So that was a classified memo. And as I've looked into it, that thinking became an entrenched part of federal policy from the 70s on. You've got bipartisan support. Nixon was very much into that. George Bush the First, very much into population control. I mean, we've got the money for the abortion industry comes from those people who think there's too many people around. So it's just a modest proposal, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Have you ever read A Modest Proposal?
I have not read. I was
Jonathan Swift. He talked about the proposition to the English nobility that they should just eat the Irish children because that would be a source of food. It was a monograph, an ironic monograph called A Modest Proposal.
Okay.
Anyway, just Google it. And so the proposal is that you get rid of poverty by getting rid of poor people. And the easiest way to get rid of poor people is to do it before they're born. Okay. And that's been part of a bipartisan support in our federal government. So we need to ask ourselves why is population control a compelling government interest? Why? We need to go back and question that. So that's the third leg that it stands on. And that leg is where all the money for the abortion industry comes from.
And RBG in what year, give or take?
What was her Salon interview? I can't remember the year of it.
But it's 2000s, 2000.
Yeah, something like that, okay. 2006.
She basically all but admitted that is a
well, she didn't say that she believed it, but she said that was the idea, and that she intimated that was, probably one of the reasons why the court went as far as it did with Roe versus Wade, which was to strike everything down.
And was it Gruden or who's the gentleman that you mentioned?
Oh, Jonathan Gruber.
Yeah, and he basically shows that the abortion industry is a huge financial supporter of Medicaid. Is that correct?
No.
No. Okay.
No. What he did was he was one of the architects of Obamacare, and he basically wrote a monograph. He's an economist, and he wrote a monograph calculating how much elective abortion had saved the federal government in Medicaid funding. Okay.
Because low-income individuals are not entering into the world and
correct
going on to Medicaid.
We're eliminating the problem of poverty in this country by eliminating the poor. Yeah. So that's the third leg, and that's where all the money comes from. It's from those people who think there's too many people, and the people we ought to get rid of are the poor. But then there's one more leg that it stands on. And even if you chop all those other legs off, there's one more leg. And that is, if he can walk away, I can walk away. Okay, and this was hinted at in Kennedy's famous, determining the mystery of life. The reason why, Justice Kennedy, when he talked about the need for abortion for women to be able to meet their aspirational dreams. It's called the Mystery Passage. And this is the issue for men, and pardon me, I'm going to be really blunt here. For men, sex is about a 5-minute commitment, or can be. For women, it's a 20-year commitment. And that inequality of commitment, of time, energy, life, is what women are chafing against. We want to be as free to have sex and walk away as he is. So what it reflects is a thought process that says, my sexuality is something that I use for my pleasure. It doesn't extend beyond that, doesn't mean anything more than that. That's the whole purpose of it. It's for my pleasure, and that's it. And the fact that another human being comes into existence is a very inconvenient reality. The only way that a woman can walk away is if she aborts. And then she's not going to walk away because that baby's always with her. Okay. But it's this theoretical women's empowerment. This is the whole women's empowerment argument. So as long as we have men treating sex as a 5-minute commitment, we're going to have women aborting.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we as a church want to look at what can we do to help this, I think there's a huge need to talk to men
100%.
about what is the purpose of sexuality? Why do you have this ability? What's it mean? What's it for? And there's a huge need for men to repent of, like Fred, in my scenario, a huge need for men to repent of their walk away, which has killed their children.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So those 4 legs are what the justification of abortion stands on. And some of them can be addressed by some aspects, like American Association of Pro-Life OB-GYN can talk with authority about the effects of abortion on women. They can also talk with the authority about the fact that that a human being in the womb is no more a blob of tissue than you and I are.
Yeah.
But these other two legs, it's going to definitely take the church.
Those are big beasts out there.
They're big beasts. And part of what is really compelling, sometime Google the CareNet survey. Okay, so CareNet surveyed women who had abortions, who then came into CareNet and were willing to be talked to. The statistics, most of the women actually were attending church at the time of the abortion. I think it's like 35%. Some of them were attending twice a week. Okay. The time between positive pregnancy test and decision to abort, what do you think? How much time?
I would guess not very much.
24 hours.
24 hours.
The time between decision to abort and carrying out the abortion, what do you think?
Oh, man. 24 hours?
7 days. She's going to be in church once. Who's she going to talk to? Who's she going to talk to? Is she going to talk to the male pastor? I'm sorry. I know we need male pastors. It has to be. I have no problem with that.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is, who is she going to talk to? Who's the woman in the congregation that can keep her mouth shut, that can give good counsel, that can help her find resources, that can protect her dignity within the church? We've got some introspection to do.
I think that's a great lesson for the church.
Okay.
In fact, please don't forget to, after this is done, to remind me, because that's something that we should be doing at our church. And we have the resources to do so. We have the people to do so, but we don't have a here are the people you talk to. Yeah. And to have that out there, that would be just a monumental step just for our church and for probably all churches that are listening.
Yep. And she needs to know that before she gets pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Because 24 hours.
Wow.
Okay. So that has to be part of talking about repentance and forgiveness, you know. And the other lesson from that survey is that we have, it's not just women, you know, we have the opportunity to catechize about really important things, meaning of life and death, you know, resurrection. You know, we might want to consider also catechizing about the meaning of sexuality and the purpose of it from a scriptural standpoint, and why there's this need for a hedge of protection around women before they enter into a sexual relationship so that they're not in a position where they're abandoned. Because, again, abortion is abandonment. It's always at the root of abortion.
A couple of thoughts, if I can go on kind of a theological aside here, because I know I want to say aside because I also want to, I understand you're representing a big organization that does a lot of things, and I want to put an aside so that you can jump on this if you want to, but you can also stay distant from it if you want to as well. But just a couple of things just from, as you're speaking, and I'm thinking of theologically the way that we would talk about the devil working. I want to focus on two, how these just so, it's such a great example of the way the devil works. So one, we're talking about with our 7th grade class. So we're going through the book of Exodus, right? And the book of Exodus is about people who are in slavery, and they're enslaved to somebody, and they need to be emancipated, brought to freedom, and out of that bondage. And through the book of Exodus, there's 2 layers. There's the physical slavery that they're in, where the Israelites, they are in the nation of Egypt, and there is a pharaoh, and there are physical soldiers that keep them enslaved, and so that they can't go out and worship God. That's Moses goes to Pharaoh and says, "Let my people go so that they may worship God," or God is speaking through Moses there, right? So they are kept away from a healthy life, from right worship, from that which is good, true, and beautiful because of a physical enslavement. Now, in the book of Exodus, there's two layers there. There's a physical and there's a spiritual. And for especially us as modern day Christians who are not in physical Egypt, but we're supposed to be invited into the story to understand these lessons of spiritual slavery, which is going to be taken care of ultimately with Christ. But the way the spiritual slavery works is you still have an overseer, you still have a pharaoh and a dictator, and that is, of course, going to be Satan. And Satan is going to spiritually enslave us. Now, how does he do that? He always does that through vice, right? Or through temptation, or through sin, right? By giving us shortcuts in life and saying these things will make you happy. And he dangles that in front of us. And as soon as we do those things, then he enslaves us. Then he kind of tempts us beforehand and shows us something that looks pleasant. And then immediately afterwards, he says, look what you did, right? And then he keeps you down and he keeps you away from God because of your guilt and such. And that's very much his strategy. It's in the book of Exodus. It's throughout, right? So when you mention 24 hours, right? Or you mention within a week, right? Catching them in between church services for those that they're going to church on a regular basis. You can just see the way that Satan is able to take something, dangle it in front of them. Maybe it's the affection of a man, or maybe it's physical pleasure, or whatever it is, all these different narratives that he's bringing out, catches you in that, and within 24 hours plants a decision in your mind of a shortcut. And then as soon as you do that, then he's got you. Now, the good news, of course, and the Christian message is there's emancipation, and that's going to come through Christ, and it's going to come through the full forgiveness of sins, which Christ has taken on the cross for whatever action that is, whether it's abortion or anything else. But to understand that, that's how Satan's going to be working here. He's going to dangle something in front of you. He's going to say, this is the easy route. It's going to be a lie. And then he's going to try to get you, right? He's going to try to have you enslaved to that for the rest of your life if he can. And it's such a testament of this is the way that evil has always worked. And it's certainly working out here. So that's one, and you don't have to make any comments on that, as I said. Yeah.
Well,
it's up to you.
I mean, I'm not a pastor, okay? So I can't speak with any kind of theological authority. But I can speak about difficult things in my own life where things seem easy, except for what I've been taught is not right. Okay. It'd be easy to take this path. It'd be lucrative to take this path. It'd be wonderful to take this path, except that I know it's not right. And so doing something because you know it's the right thing to do feels like jumping off a cliff. It does. And you're scared, and you're not sure what's going to happen. I'm sure what's going to happen if I take the easy path. Money, education, whatever. I'm sure about that. But what if I just do the right thing in this situation? Oh my goodness, the only way I'm going to be okay is if there's a God that's going to protect me. For just simply for doing the right thing. And I would just encourage anybody that's tempted, to take the easy path. Jump. God'll be there for you. That I guess I can just say that in my own life. Yeah. I'm not a theologian. I can just say that he is always there for his people who do the right thing.
And that is spot on for back to Exodus. He says, and in Joshua, he says the same thing. He says, be strong and be courageous, for I am the Lord. Be strong and courageous, for I brought you out of Egypt. Be strong and courageous, for I made a promise with Abraham. So the antidote, or the protection from these attacks of slavery, physical and spiritual, is, as you said, trusting in God, jumping and trusting him, and being strong and courageous. I love C.S. Lewis says that courage is the virtue, that's the point where all the other virtues are tested.
It doesn't feel like courage. It feels like absolute terror. But you do it anyway because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah. Second one I wanted to comment on. Yeah. So we as Christians, and certainly within the Lutheran Church, will say that the man is the head of the household. And that has certainly historically that's been abused. The reaction against it has been to try to completely jumble that up and make it look completely different. But I think this is a great example of, as you're telling the story, and probably everyone had the same experience, as you're telling the story about, was it Jane and Fred? These hypothetical, right? When you're telling that story, the person that I'm furious at is Fred. Right?
That's the person I'm furious at too,
yeah.
honestly.
Jane's the one who is being abused throughout this whole process. And it doesn't mean that she doesn't need to go through repentance and forgiveness for her role in it. But the chief role in this whole situation is Fred. And what a potent example where you're saying, she's saying out loud in front of Fred and in front of you, well, I'm not sure if I want to have an abortion, but I'm really scared to raise this alone.
Right.
Well, you're not supposed to raise this alone. The instigator in this whole thing is Fred, who wants his own pleasure and wants zero responsibility. And I think you're spot on when what's behind all of this. I feel bad for the women, who have been abused through this whole process. And I feel very furious at the men who, whether they want it or not, they have the responsibility to where if you're going to engage in that action, at that point, you're the head of that household. You're the head of that situation. And I want you to move towards marriage where we can make it official and give you all the support physically and spiritually to support that household. But at that point, you're now the one the buck stops with you, with this wife and with this unborn child.
Well, and I think it's really interesting. It's always fascinated me that Christ said, and the two will become one flesh, and what God has put together, let not man put asunder.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm a very literal person. Okay. Where's the one flesh? It's in her womb. Guess what? You're married. And I have sons, and I said, son, but to both of them, I said, you need to think 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 times before you have sex with somebody. Because the moment you have sex with them, that is my daughter-in-law, and I will enforce that. So it's an issue of saying, look, when you take this one flesh relationship onto yourself, then you have become one flesh. Whether you stood in a church or not to make that public, the reality is you are one flesh. I mean, that's the concrete reality.
Mm-hmm.
And God has spoken that reality into existence in another human being where you literally are one flesh. Now, I could go beyond that because there's some really fascinating science that looks at the fact that women retain in their body cells from their babies.
Yeah.
Okay, so they literally become the baby's stem cells actually literally live in the mom.
Is it true that, so like you've had sons, do you have Y chromosomes in your body?
I sure do.
Wow, that is bad. I've heard that before, and I didn't know where to verify it.
And it's in the part of the brain that's in the very emotional part of the brain, which is fascinating. So, but anyway, that's a diversion. But what I'm saying is, as people who look at God's word as being true, then we need to look at all of God's word being true. Mm-hmm. And even the part that compels us to behave differently. The part that says, no, I know everybody's having sex on prom night, but I'm not ready to be a father, so I'm not going to do that. Mm-hmm. That it's that kind of a thought process that we got to get going. Okay, what does this mean? It's such a Lutheran question.
Yeah.
Okay, here it is. What does this mean? And if we can, it would be wonderful to have a statistic to show that there's a difference in abortion rate or pregnancy rate inside or outside the Lutheran Church.
It's not out there.
It's not out there.
Yeah.
It's there's really not a difference. What there's a difference in, I think, is in it's in the reasons. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if you're from a family that is that has been going to church and you're afraid of damaging mom and dad's reputation, you don't want pastor to think bad of you, blah 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 blah, I'll just hide it. Mm-hmm. Versus, I have no resources. It's a different set of reasons. Doesn't matter the reason, the outcome still is damage for women and sorrow and sadness. But maybe looking specifically at the reasons women in the church abort might be helpful. To guide catechesis.
Yeah, that would be a valuable resource. Yeah. And as you're talking, I'm thinking, it's just a good testament to the fullness of theology, or the fullness of God's word, to put it another way, the fullness of the expression of Christian belief. Because as we're talking about what's led to this woman in this certain situation who's having an abortion, as you said, there's going to be different circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
One is, we've lost maybe our sexual ethic. One is maybe we've lost our understanding of the man's role. We've lost that. As you talked about, someone that might be scared of, tarnishing their parents' reputation. Okay, well, we've obviously lost like the understanding of grace. And there's all of these things that get lost. There's all these dominoes that have to fall down that are rooted in a proper theological understanding. You have to knock multiple ones down before you can ever get to a situation where culturally or individually, these ideas are being not only accepted but supported. But you have to knock so many different things down, and it's a good testament to dot your I's and cross your T's as you're doing your theology, because these are resources that should be used for supporting these, what should be very obvious good versus evil type battles that are taking place. Understand the role of the household, understand the role of parents, understand all of these things, and that those are, as you said, kind of hedges or boundaries that support these good gifts that God has given. Let me highlight one other thing. So are you a Michigan fan? Do you follow?
Well, let me tell you my story.
Yeah.
I'm from Zanesville, Ohio, and you have to say Ohio correctly.
I know Zanesville well. Oh, boy.
Do you?
Yeah.
Oh, do you really? Nobody knows Zanesville, so that's amazing.
Close to, it's close to Cleveland, right?
No, south. It's on I-70. It's an hour east of Columbus.
Okay. I might have been thinking of another area. Either way, you're from Zanesville, Ohio.
So I'm from Zanesville, Ohio. Okay, that's how we say it. So all of my family went to Ohio State.
Oh, boy.
Okay. And I went to Michigan State as an undergrad. And then I went to University of Michigan. And now I live 15 minutes north of Notre Dame. So I don't talk sports at all because I can't win.
Yeah. That's funny because those are all the rivalries from. I'm a Michigan fan. I've born and bred. I was born in Michigan. So.
Oh, I didn't know that. Where
I grew up. I was born in Dearborn, so outside of Detroit.
Yeah.
Yep. And then I've got family that was up in Troy and Roseville and stuff like that. So from Michigan roots.
Ann Arbor.
Growing up in Indiana, we've got most of my friends were Notre Dame fans. Right. Of course, the Ohio State rivalry.
You got it.
Anyway, what I'm drawing is Harbaugh, right? Harbaugh, our coach, football coach.
Right.
He is very outspoken pro-life.
Oh,
which is shocking for someone who's the head coach of the University of Michigan, which is not.
That's great.
That university would not be along those lines at all.
I trained there for. I was in there for
very well.
10 years.
But he's spoken at many different conferences. He's very open. And for example, here's something that he's done, which I just love. I hope we never get rid of him. I hope he never leaves, because I love someone with this kind of moral quality to him coaching the teams. Great, go win football games, but go raise good men. Right.
Right.
And what he says to all of his players, and he says this to, I just looked at the quote this week, my brother was showing me. So he speaks to all of his players, all of the staff and the support staff, and says, if you have an unwanted pregnancy, do not abort. I will take that child. And my wife and I will raise that child. And I think he's 58 or
Good
so.
for him.
And he even says, he's like, we've got a big house. We'll be just fine. Right. And he's just, whoever, like any of his football players, if they get pregnant, do not abort. I'll take that child. Right. Just bring to term. Don't do all this physical and psychological damage on yourself, on the spouse. Do your due diligence, and I'll raise them. And I just think, what a wonderful thing for a man like that to do. Yeah.
Yeah. Love that guy.
So I hope he stays as the head coach of Michigan football forever.
That's great.
Yeah. So we need men like that. We definitely need men like that. So I do want, you've kind of touched on this, but would you be okay pivoting to going through some of the backdrop of how did we get here? You've touched on some of that. I sense there's a lot more there. And I think that's important, because I think for people to understand to understand where you've been, you have to understand all of these motivations that led to moving the ball forward down the field. Right.
Yeah.
So I would like to do that. Does that sound good?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I've got to use the restroom real quick.
Okay.
So how about we take a quick break and then we can go through some of the history.
Let's do that.
Okay. Thank you. All right. And we're back, and we were talking just over this brief break, and you mentioned we should probably focus first on something very important, which is how are abortions being done today? Right.
Yeah.
How are women doing abortions?
So there was a recent uh, publication that looked at how most abortions are being done. And it turns out that over half the abortions in the country are drug-induced abortions. There are abortions done with a drug called mifeprex and then a second drug called misoprostol or Cytotec. So that's the RU46 is the way some people know mifeprex. It's mifepristone is the chemical name.
Okay.
So the way a mifepristone abortion works is that it cuts off the woman's ability to feed the baby. It interferes with progesterone. And progesterone is the hormone that the woman's body makes when she's pregnant that changes her body so that she can carry a child. And mifepristone blocks that hormone. It's a progesterone blocker. Okay. And that is how most abortions are done today. Now, the whole approval process is of that drug. The drug was approved back in 2000. That's all under a lawsuit right now. And if anybody's interested, they can Google the Alliance Defending Freedom, who has information on that suit. But the long and the short is right now, women are able to get that abortion drug without ever seeing a doctor. And that is hugely dangerous. It's dangerous for women, even if you don't care about the human being in the womb. For a woman to take a powerful anti-steroid drug, which is what mifepristone is, it puts her at danger. And this is how it puts her at danger. Because that drug, the complications of that drug increase as she's further and further in pregnancy. And the only way to tell how far a woman is in pregnancy when she's that early is to do an ultrasound. But that requires that you actually see somebody that can do an ultrasound. You have a person-to-person visit. So right now the drugs are being dispensed just with an internet visit or a phone visit, and the woman is being mailed the drugs.
Wow.
Okay. So she doesn't know how far along she is. There's a suit, a lawsuit about a woman who went to Planned Parenthood, was told she was 6 weeks along, never had an exam, took the drugs and delivered a 30-some week baby who died.
Oh, my goodness.
Okay, because nobody ever looked at her. And it brings up a huge issue because it is a right of every woman to have informed consent. Okay, you can't have informed consent if you don't know how far along you are. Because informed consent requires that you be told what your risks are for that particular procedure. What your risks are, not what some theoretical woman's risks are, what your risks are. And so the risks of a woman having to have surgery, if she's 7 weeks pregnant, she's got about a 1 out of 20 chance of ending up in the ER needing surgery. If she's a month further along and she's 12 or 13 weeks, she's got a 1 out of 3 chance. 30%
Wow.
of women end up in the ER needing surgery to remove the tissue or to stop bleeding. And there's no way that somebody can give you your risks if they haven't examined you. So these women that are getting the drugs dispensed via the internet are not getting accurate informed consent. They're not being told what their risks are. Worse, these women, if a woman has a blood type that is negative, or O negative, B negative, AB negative, A negative, Rh negative blood type. Every woman that has an Rh negative blood type, when she gets pregnant and she has a miscarriage or an abortion or a birth, needs to have a medicine called Rogam. Rogam is what allows her not to, it calms her body down so that her body doesn't make an immune response to the next baby. Okay. So if she has an abortion and she doesn't get Rogam, she's got a 15% chance that her next baby will die in utero.
Wow.
And she's got over 30% chance that the baby will have complications. That's particularly poignant to me because my mother-in-law, my husband's mother, was Rh negative. And it was before Rogam. So he lost 2 sisters because their Rogam wasn't around. And the babies died in utero. So it's real. And the abortion industry doesn't care. They don't care what happens to the next pregnancy as long as they get paid for the abortion of this pregnancy. So these women who are having the drugs mailed to them, they've never seen a doctor. They don't know how far along they are. They're not getting informed consent. They're not getting ROGAM because they're not seeing anybody. And then they abort, and in the future, they're the ones that end up with the Rh negative babies that die. Worse. 1 out of 50 women, somewhere between 1 out of 40 and 1 out of 50 women, have the baby that's not planted inside their womb. It's planted inside their tube. It's called an ectopic pregnancy.
Yeah.
When that happens, mifepristone, the drug that they're being mailed, does not stop the growth of that baby. Okay? So these women with an ectopic pregnancy, they take mifepristone and they have pain and bleeding. And they call and they say, I've got terrible pain and I'm bleeding. And they're told, honey, lay down and take a Tylenol. That's a normal part of the mifeprex abortion. And they die.
Jeez.
Because the tube ruptures, the symptoms of a rupturing tube are pain and bleeding. Same symptoms as a mifepristone abortion. And there have been women who have died because they hemorrhaged to death, because the ectopic pregnancy ruptured inside. And that is also malpractice, because the FDA label, the drug label, says you must rule out ectopic pregnancy. Okay, it is malpractice to give that drug to a woman without knowing that she does not have an ectopic pregnancy. And yet the abortion industry is giving it to women without doing an ultrasound. The only way you can find out if she has a pregnancy inside the womb as opposed to the tube is to do an ultrasound.
How are they getting away with this?
That's an excellent question. Part of the reason they get away with it is because women who have abortions don't sue their abortionists for malpractice. So the abortionists can get away with malpractice and the women don't sue, because then they would have to talk about their abortion.
Publicly, yeah.
They would have to publicly talk about it. And that is horrible. So all of these things are dangers that the abortion industry just hides behind this mantra of safe as Tylenol, safe as Tylenol. It's not. It's a dangerous drug. It's a dangerous procedure. And it's being given to women who are under no medical supervision. And then one other aspect of this whole thing of not being under any kind of medical supervision is that these women are taking the drug. They've been told they've got a blob of tissue. And they go in the bathroom and they deliver a baby. They deliver a baby where they can see the baby's head and arms and hands and legs. And then what do? So pregnancy care centers are being called, women are saying, I have my baby, I don't know what to do. I put it in the freezer because I don't want to flush it down the toilet. What am I supposed to do with this baby? Okay, clearly a baby. Think about the psychological trauma. We already talked a little bit about the trauma from a surgical abortion. In a surgical abortion, a woman goes in, she comes out, she's not pregnant. Okay, she's never seen anything that came out of her. Now these women are delivering the baby alone, by themselves. Undeniable reality in front of them. Just imagine the psychological trauma that's going to produce in the next few years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so all of these things are enmeshed in this whole issue of willy-nilly, mailing out abortion drugs to anybody. And by the way, there's even another aspect
There's more?
of this.
Oh,
there's
Lord have
more.
Mercy.
Okay, so you're doing an internet consultation with a woman. You have no idea who's on the other side of that laptop screen. You have no idea if he's holding a gun to her head. You have no idea. So there's no way you can screen that woman for sex trafficking. There's no way you can screen her for coercion, which is the responsibility of the OB-GYN who sees their patients, especially ones who are in situations of distress. Are you being trafficked? Are you being forced? Is somebody coercing you? There's no way you can do that kind of screening because all you see is her and you don't see what else is going on in the room. And there's no way to guarantee who that drug is going to go to. So you've got someone who's a pimp who has a woman, say it, and they get the drug and they give it to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And there are like nearly 70 sites where you can go online and order the drug. Some of them give a bulk discount. Now, who would want a bulk discount? Who would use a bulk discount except sex traffickers and abusers? I mean, think about what horrific stuff is being unleashed in women by this willy-nilly use of the drug and separating the woman, especially the trafficked woman or the abused woman, from any possibility of being identified by the medical industry. It's medical malpractice. It would be malpractice in any other setting, except the abortionist never gets sued for malpractice.
That might be the most absurd thing I've ever heard, is that there's a bulk discount.
There were some sites that gave a bulk discount. We looked at it about 5 years ago.
Wow. So this has been going on for quite some time.
Oh, yeah.
This isn't 6 months old. This has been going on for years.
No. And that's the whole lie that, the regulations were relaxed because of COVID. No way. We did this study on internet access about 5 or 6 years ago, way before COVID. Okay. And Aid Access was one of those sites that was giving, mailing drugs, and they're sent through the mail, and there's really no way to regulate that.
They're just death pills being delivered via UPS.
U.S. mail.
U.S. mail.
Yeah, I don't know about UPS, but
yeah.
So it's important. I wanted to make sure that women understand how dangerous it is to go to a mail order site and to get these drugs with no medical supervision, nobody screening them. How really dangerous it is for them. So thank you for letting me tell people that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Those that are pushing this, what's the motivation?
Money.
Is it just money?
It's money.
Yeah.
Money. And I think there's probably some eugenic components behind that too.
Mm-hmm.
We touched a little bit on that before, but Planned Parenthood has a long history of being a racist.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, their founder, Margaret Sanger, she said once, the best and most merciful thing a large family can do for one of their members is to kill them. I mean, this is Margaret Sanger. It's Margaret Sanger, and Planned Parenthood it started out as the American Eugenics Society. That was its name before it changed its name to Planned Parenthood.
The American Eugenics
Correct.
Society.
They were the American Eugenics Society, and then they changed to Planned Parenthood after World War II because eugenics got a bad name. But that's how they started. And so their commitment to wiping out poverty by wiping out poor people goes back to their very founding.
Can you walk us through that beginning?
Yeah. So in the early 1900s, Margaret Sanger was she was the founder of Planned Parenthood, and she was just an outspoken racist and an outspoken eugenicist.
And is that well documented?
That's well documented. Yeah. And even Planned Parenthood admits it, but it's going to be hard for them to distance themselves from their founder, whom they're so proud of.
Mm-hmm.
And she was part of the whole community of people who thought that, one way to improve the eugenic stock was to eliminate human weeds, humans that should never have been born. And that was the founding idea. She founded Planned Parenthood. And her, the successors, Planned Parenthood has been part of the recipient of, like I said, these funds that were part of the population control policies of the U.S. I think Population Council, who is intimately involved with Planned Parenthood, Population Council to date has received like $430 million from the federal government for various different projects.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, Planned Parenthood locates its abortion facilities in areas that are within a short geographic distance from Black and Hispanic neighborhoods, and that's not by accident. They'll say, well, the actual location isn't in that district. Yeah, but if you're within a mile of that district, it's essentially, within that district. I think that it's upwards of 3/4 of their clinics are located in those areas. And if you look at the rate of abortions, of abortions that are done that are separated out by race, you got about 1/3 of them being done on Black women. Black women are or 12% of the population. So the vast majority of percentage of women who get abortions are Black.
And that's today.
That's today.
That's today. Okay.
And I think in New York, it's like over half the Black babies are aborted.
Over half of the Black babies are aborted
so you got
in New York.
Yeah. So you look at this, and it's a genocide.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a genocide that the African American community is just waking up to.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that they wake up before it's irrevocable.
Yeah. So they are waking up to it now.
And they're waking up to it.
Mm-hmm.
I at the AAPLOG conference a few years ago, we had Pastor Walter Hoy, who is a Black pastor from California, speaking about irreversibility,
mm-hmm.
and speaking about the trend in the Black population toward irreversible population control. There's a point where if you stop reproducing, the population itself implodes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and the Black population is close to that point. So it's not by accident that Planned Parenthood has done this. It's eugenic.
And it was overtly part of the original plan.
It was part
both
of the
Sanger
original
and
plan.
that group that she was part of.
Correct.
Those are things they were striving towards.
American Eugenics Society, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And see, this is personally, I take this really personal because I am the 6th of 9 children. My father was way under the poverty level his whole life. We were dirt poor, okay? And I certainly would have been one of those that Margaret Sanger targeted for abortion.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't consider myself a human weed. I consider myself a human being, just like any human being that's conceived at any economic level. We're all people. We all are part of the human race. And there are no human weeds. There are just human beings.
Mm-hmm. That's one of the things that I appreciate about Christianity is different ways to put it. One pastor, Bishop Barham, says it's a public religion. In other words, like you can dive into and you can maybe poke fun of it if you don't really understand it, but take any of the doctrines that we stand on and I'll put those in front of a microscope and feel very comfortable. To your point, you can't take any Christian doctrine and come up with anything that would be so appalling or should be so appalling to anybody that comes across a quote like that. Find a quote that says human beings are like weeds, or we need to exterminate a certain race from that. Find that in Augustine, find that in Aquinas, find that in Anselm, find that in Jerome, find that in St. Paul, find that in the Bible. Not going to find that. So it's, I'm comfortable putting the Christian religion out there and saying, go ahead and examine it and we can talk about this. But to your point, there's a lot of things that they have to keep under the blankets. They have to keep hidden from you that are, as you said, these aren't conspiracies. These are right out there in the open with Margaret Sanger, with the foundation of these kind of principles and ideas, and with Planned Parenthood, which today is put forward as a virtuous organization.
Because they have the money to market.
Mm-hmm.
See, in my opinion, we're in a dangerous state in this country where opinions are formed by who can pay the most for marketing. And that makes us very vulnerable to making some very stupid decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw that happen with Proposition 3 in Michigan. Proposition 3 it was the constitutional amendment that was proposed to the Michigan Constitution that basically took away all parental rights, all informed consent regulations, any kind of limitation on how far into pregnancy and abortion can be done, wiped it out. It was completely a misinformation campaign. The pro-life side was outspent like 20-1 from outside money that came in to support that. People were told, if you don't vote for this, women can't get miscarriage care. Complete baloney.
Mm-hmm.
Complete baloney. And the actual wording of the amendment that was voted on had very little to do with the actual constitutional amendment that went in. Mm-hmm. It was complete deception, and yet a state, because of the money spent on marketing, a state was completely deceived into voting for something that was almost the exact opposite of what they thought they were voting for.
Wow.
It's sobering. And we're looking at that in Ohio right now, too. We'll see what happens in Ohio. But when you can influence people by buying social media, by shutting down one side of the conversation so that all that is heard is the other side of the conversation, in what way do we live in a free society?
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have free speech, you don't have a free society.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't right now.
That's a potent example of that. So what are the main fights that are taking place right now? So what are your colleagues, what's occupying your time throughout the week?
Well,
other than coming on podcasts in Minnesota.
That's true too. We're American Association of Pro-Life OB-GYNs is doing everything that they can do to try to get out accurate information about abortion, what it is, what it does to women. Because what Dobbs did was open up a conversation in 50 states that had been shut down 50 years ago. So when Roe was decided, there was no conversation. This is what you're going to do. Laws were wiped out, and the people had no choice. They had no decision in it. Now there's a discussion all across the country. So we're trying the best we can to inform people, look, this is what the issue is about. It's about killing human beings in the womb for no medical reason. That's what we're talking about. And to try to get across some of the harms that happen to women, because women are being told it's completely safe, and it's not. It's not, short or long term. So that's what we're doing, and that's occupying a lot of time. As the chair of the Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine, I also represent the Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine when it comes to talking about the lawsuit that we have filed against the FDA about their approval. So I can't talk a whole lot about that, but if you want information about that, go to the Alliance Defending Freedom website and look up AHMVFDA.
What is it again?
AHM, Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine versus Food and Drug Administration.
Okay.
Okay.
Can you say anything about that just to give people a sense of what they'd be looking up?
Well, if you want to know the gist of it, go to on the right side of that page that comes up, ADF, the AHM versus FDA. Go to the bottom column and read the complaint. Okay. And that's where we outline what the FDA did and didn't do in the approval process.
Would we be allowed to pull that up on the here?
Sure. Google AHMV FDA, and then leave a space and put ADF.
If I read that,
yes,
would that be okay? I could just
You'd
read
be
that.
Appalled. Oh,
well,
no,
I mean, could I read it right now?
Oh, it's
like that wouldn't jeopardize anything that's
long.
going. That one paragraph you talked about.
No, the whole.
Oh, okay. So it's a big one. Okay.
It's long, but
okay.
I would encourage anybody that wants to do a deep dive, go to the ADF website.
Okay.
And you'll get the deep dive information.
That'd be good to put in there. How do you relax at night? Right? I mean, you're on the front lines of dealing with, when you're talking about so many of these things, I can't think of any more potent example of where Satan's at work or where evil is manifested. Even somebody that doesn't believe in the Bible or Christianity, when they're looking at this, they have to say this is evil. Bulk discount on a drug that could very well is going to harm a living baby. There's no checkpoints. It's just distributed Pez style, and you can get a bulk discount.
Style.
What's that?
Pet style.
Pet style. Yeah.
Is that what you said?
Well, I said Pez, like, those Pez dispensers where you just kind of pop it open and it keeps spitting out candy. But
go to adfmedia.org. It's the fourth one down.
Fourth one down.
There you go. That's the one. Okay, go down to the bottom, and where it says complaint. See the very above, related resources. Yep, that one. So that is the complaint.
Okay.
And like I said, I think it's like 25 pages. It's very long, but
yeah, I see your organization there on the top with a bunch of other ones. And okay, well, good. We've got a little bit of homework for this, so yeah,
it's an eye opener.
Yeah, man, oh damn.
But
yeah, there's just a manifestation of evil, right? To deceive with so much money and incentive on behalf of those who are deceiving, right? And then to deceive the one who is deceived, and then to leave that person, that woman, hurt and alone, physically abused, mentally, emotionally
Yep.
abused, relationally abused.
Yep.
And that's, what's the word of the that pastor that spoke, the irreversibility, or
Oh yeah. Yeah, irreversibility.
yeah. I thought about that, of just that's the, to market decisions that are irreversible and have a lifelong, you will struggle with that for the entirety of your life.
Yep.
And then it mixes in with sex trafficking and all these other things, which of course are going to
Yep.
play a role into these things. I mean, that is, so anyway, you're fighting evil right where evil is most active.
Yeah.
How do you sleep at night?
I read the last chapter of the book, and it ends well. There's nothing else. I mean, when I talked about personal experience of doing the right thing, it does feel like jumping off the cliff. And if God isn't there, we're done.
Yeah.
If he is, we're not.
Yeah.
So I'm trusting that he's there and we're not done.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Yeah, that was well said. Yeah, I think stories help with that. The biblical stories, of course, but you were looking at the Lord of the Rings book over here, and there's something that's I've talked about that.
I love that book.
There's so many times, right, where what does Sam say? He says, "How could the world ever be right when so much has gone wrong?"
Well, I remember Gandalf and Frodo talking there in the mines of Moria, and Frodo says, "It's a pity I didn't kill Gollum," and Gandalf says, "Pity? It's pity that that saves us." It was
your
just
hand.
that stayed your hand. It's pity that stayed your hand. And you look at the end of the story and you say, yeah, it was Gollum that caused Frodo to do the right thing. Even though he couldn't do it.
Yeah.
So it's a masterfully done story, and there's a lot in there that is very encouraging because nobody could have seen the end from the beginning. They just kept doing the right thing in the hope. So we're always like, we're moving in hope.
Yeah.
Even though if we look around us, we won't see that, but we're still moving in hope. Yeah. And that's what we have to do.
You gestured towards, within that conversation, one of my favorite quotes where Frodo says, I wish the ring had never come to me. And then Gandalf says, and I wish, and he says, so do all who have lived to see such times. But what is that to you?
It's not for us to decide.
Yeah.
Ours is to decide what we do with the time that we have.
Amen.
Yes. No, I've thought about that a lot of times too.
Yeah. That's and that brings you to, there's at the end when they're walking through Mordor and Sam sees that little star up there, and he remembers that above all this chaos, there's eternal light.
Yeah.
And it's such a good imagery of the light that can't be tarnished by even the abortion industry and even Planned Parenthood and even a 20-to-1 type budget of marketing, right? To say you'd rather fight for the White Tower than you would for Mordor, no matter how many more troops.
Well, and if you look at it, despite bipartisan support through federal funding, despite the massive amount of money that's been poured into abortion support, despite all of those things, we still have hundreds of thousands of people marching at the March for Life. We have more people expressing a clear, when you do the nuanced questionnaires, a clear thought that it is wrong to kill a baby who could survive outside the womb. The majority of the people in the United States, despite all the pressure to the other side, we haven't caved. We've actually won. Roe versus Wade is gone. Yeah. It's down to the states. It's one heck of a fight. We're not anywhere. We're at the end of the beginning, but we're not gone. We're not dead. We didn't go away. And the more you look into this issue, the more thoughtful people are about it, the more you can only come to the conclusion that we should be defending human life, regardless of how vulnerable or small or big or genetic makeup. We should include those people in our circle of love and protection for the human family.
And what a gift just to be able to fight.
What a gift. Yeah, that's right. It's a gift to be able to fight. That's right.
what are things that someone who's listening, what are the first types of things, the easiest things moving up that people can do in order to help with this, right?
Okay. Well, I'm glad you asked, because there was something I didn't say when we were talking about chemical abortion that leads into this. What's an easy thing to do? Okay, so let me back up a little bit. The chemical abortion drug works by blocking a hormone, a natural hormone that the woman's body makes. That natural hormone is progesterone. If a woman takes the chemical abortion drug, the first drug, the mifepristone, the one that blocks progesterone, and she changes her mind, because remember, it's not a surgical abortion. She takes the mifepristone, then a couple days later she takes the second drug, which causes the baby's body to be expelled. If she takes the first drug and she changes her mind, she has 72 hours to get additional natural progesterone. And there's a whole network of doctors, including a lot of AAPLOG doctors, who are willing to give that woman natural progesterone, and it'll kick the mifepristone off the progesterone receptor, and it'll increase the baby's chances of surviving from around 25% to around 68%. Okay, it's not 100%. It's a biological system. So she's got a second chance. What should the church be talking about but second chances? Okay, so it is very easy to go on the abortion pill reversal website. Just Google it. Order the little cards. Okay, little pocket, business cards. Drop them in the bathroom at Starbucks. Drop them in the bathroom at the gas station. Drop them in the bathroom at the college. Get out the word. Drop them in the bathroom at the church. Get out the word that if she takes the first drug and changes her mind, call this number. Okay, and to be connected with someone who can give her baby a second chance at life.
What a great thing for a youth group to do.
What a great thing for a youth group to do. So because the decision is made in 24 hours, okay, and the carrying out is a week, we've got this short window of time. So people need to know before she takes the pill. She's only got 72 hours. She needs to know before she takes the pill that, this might give her baby a increased chance of living. Okay. So that's one thing. Get out that word. The second thing is, we're coming on an election season. Elections make a difference. You really need to know where your peeps stand that you're going to vote for on this issue. And I would really encourage people to go to the AAPLOG website and to start to become conversant in what abortion is and what it isn't, because it's all going to come down to that. It's going to come down to, well, you just hate women. And no, we actually love women, and we actually care for them, really care for them, to the point where we're not going to harm their future fertility either. We're not going to harm their future mental health, that kind of thing. So to be able to become conversant in this dialogue, because it's a discussion that's now in every state. Everybody has to know what an abortion is, and that is a purposeful destruction of a human being in the womb for no medical reason. If there is a medical reason, it's not an elective induced abortion, period. Okay, so they're two entirely different things, apples and oranges. And we're talking regulation or prohibition of the elective killing of human beings in the womb for no medical reason. Okay, that's where the discussion has to start. And people have to be firm and confident that they understand that argument. And our website has tons of resources for them.
And that's where the advantage of the internet comes in, to where a lot of negatives, but certainly many positives. And that's one of the goals, of course, of this podcast is, when this is done, we'll have clips too, right? So we'll pick out the top 6 clips, the top 6 things you said that we want bite-sized, 5 to 12 minute. And that's a great way to share information. For instance, you talked through what is abortion, and you had, just that very simplified presentation for us. There's a little package to where don't share with them this 2.5 hour discussion with somebody out of the blue. They're not going to watch it, but share that 5-minute clip with them, or 7-minute clip they might watch that, and that might be enough to maybe just shift their thinking. I mean, you've said so many things that would just shift. Of a mother's a mother. The question is, are they a mother of a child they brought into this world, or a child that they were convinced to terminate? Either way, they're a mother. Those are just little paradigm shifts in the conversation, or your explanation that so needs to be out there, that you are not against performing a medical procedure for an ectopic pregnancy, or for something that's putting the wife's mother at risk. That's never been the stance for pro-life. That's never been the stance of the Lutheran Church or the Catholic Church or the Catholic hospitals, like you said. Like these are data points that people need to know, because most people they think the opposite.
Right.
And information is power.
Information is power. The truth sets us free. Let's put it that way.
Someone wise said that once,
They
didn't he? Yes, amen. So can we I want to pivot towards something else.
Yes, go ahead.
So when you spoke, when I listened to you maybe 6 years ago or so, you talked about, I'll let you kind of explain it, but you talked about this next topic, and I know you've got some slides that'll help with you explaining this, but this is, you concretely shifted, I don't know if shift's the right word, but you properly prepared me and helped me understand something that even as about to be pastor in his 4th year of seminary, did not understand this at all.
Okay.
Right. So talking about the way that, well, I'll let you explain it, right?
Okay. Yeah. So the prenatal genetic testing.
Yes.
Okay. So the whole, there's a whole set of things that people have to understand when they're making decisions about prenatal genetic testing. And one of them is the difference between a screening test and a diagnostic test. Mm-hmm. So when a woman goes
in... These are
in,
real quick. So these are just, this is when my wife and I go in, and my wife is pregnant.
Yeah.
And maybe the second visit or so, that's when they start to talk about these things. And they're saying, we can do these tests, da-da-da-da.
Right?
So
we can do these tests. Mm-hmm. And normally a test is done for the purpose of finding something, that you can treat, mm-hmm. that there's a benefit. So why are we doing prenatal genetic testing? Well, we could be doing prenatal genetic testing to find out, like, say, if you knew that the baby had a problem, you wouldn't invite Aunt Irma to the birth, okay? Or you would prepare yourself by if you found out that your baby, if it was important to you to know ahead of time that your baby has Down syndrome, you could meet with the parents of other children with Down syndrome and prepare. Mm-hmm. That's a good reason. Or you could say, if I find out my baby has a genetic problem, I'm not going to allow this baby to live. I'm going to abort this baby. And that is the other sort of the side of prenatal genetic testing. Why are we doing the testing? Who is it benefiting? And how is it benefiting? So let me talk a little bit just about the tests themselves, and then I'll share with you some of the experience that you and I talked about at breakfast time. Mm-hmm. Okay, so
I bet it is.
When you're in the situation where you and your wife were, mm-hmm. with second prenatal visit, and you're offered these tests, a lot of times people don't understand the kind of test that it is. Okay, so you're being told, well, you could get a blood test. Okay, mm-hmm. This blood test is 99% sensitive. Okay, wow, just a blood test, I can tell whether my baby has a significant problem or not. Why wouldn't I do that? But what they don't understand is sensitivity is not positive predictive value, and I'm going to go through that. Mm-hmm. So when you're offered a blood test, that's a screening test. And a screening test, if you want to just click the next thing, answers a certain question. It's given to just all comers to try to answer this question. Go ahead. Who is at higher risk for the problem? Who's more likely to have this problem? A screening test just puts you in a category of women who are more high risk to have a problem. Go ahead. You can do the next. It does not answer the question. Go ahead. Does my child have this problem? Okay. Diagnostic tests, on the other hand, are given to mothers who are at higher risk than the general population in order to answer the question, go ahead, does my child have this problem? Okay. So when we look at any kind of a test, mm-hmm. okay, whether it's screening or diagnostic, go ahead. You were right. Go to the next slide. There are 4 possibilities. There are 4 logical possibilities. The baby really has a problem, or the baby really does not have the problem. That's reality.
Mm-hmm.
The baby, yes or no, has the problem or does not have the problem. But then we have what the test says. So, yeah, go ahead. This is what's really true. So then we have what the test says. The test may say that the baby has a problem, or the test may say that the baby does not have a problem. That's the test results. So go ahead to the next slide. Okay, so what's really true versus the test. So when the baby really has a problem and the test says that the baby has a problem, that's called a true positive.
So the baby has Down syndrome. The test said the baby has Down syndrome. We have a good accuracy there.
You've got accuracy.
Test true positive. Okay.
Okay, now let's go to the next slide. The baby may really have a problem, but the test may say that the baby does not have a problem. That's a false negative. Okay? Or the baby doesn't have a problem and the test says the baby does. That's a false positive. Or the baby doesn't have a problem and the test says that the baby doesn't have a problem. That's a true negative. Okay, go to the next slide. So these have certain names. Positive predictive value is when you have the baby really having a problem. Yeah, hold on just a second. And the test saying, yes, it does. High specificity means that there are few times that the test says the baby has a problem and the baby does not have a problem. Okay, so high specificity means few false positives. False negative, go ahead to the next slide. False negative means that the baby really has a problem and the test says the baby does not have a problem. That is sensitivity. Okay. So when somebody says it's a very sensitive test, 99% sensitivity, it means that very few times does the test miss the problem.
False negatives are very 99% rare.
Right. But that doesn't say anything about false positives.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And true negatives is the negative predictive value. Baby doesn't have a problem. Test says the baby doesn't. So the blood tests that are offered are said to be 99% sensitive. People understand that to mean 99% of the time the test is right. But in fact, that's not true at all. So you can go to the next slide. So if you look at the general obstetric population, which has 1 out of 1,000 babies will have trisomy 21. Okay.
What is trisomy 21?
Down syndrome.
Down syndrome, okay.
The only reason I don't think trisomy 21 is a diagnosis incompatible with life.
Mm-hmm,
okay.
Mm-hmm.
I know lots of trisomy 21 children, and they're beautiful.
And they're joyful. My goodness, they know how to laugh.
In fact, there's this great poster on the highway that says, I have an extra chromosome. What is your superpower?
Yeah.
I just love it.
And if you ever work with, I did a summer camp and, had a couple weeks where I got that. And you immediately realize they are not concerned with the things we're concerned about, and they are very joyful. Yes. And it doesn't mean they don't have their ups and downs and challenges, but
But they are joyful. So if you look at giving this blood test, this cell-free DNA screening, okay, what you have is a test that has 10 true positives, 30 total positives. So its positive predictive value, only 1 out of 3 times when it gives a positive test, does the baby have Down syndrome. Okay. Okay, I'm going to go through it. Go to the next slide. So let's look at that, okay? So you have 10 babies that really have a problem. Go ahead. And 990 babies that don't. That don't have trisomy 21. Okay. You have 30 times you give these women the test. 30 times the test will say the baby has a problem, and 9,970 will say the baby doesn't have a problem. Okay. So go through the next couple slides. So go ahead through the next slide. So 10 of these 30 tests that are positive are true positives, but 20 are false positives. Okay, go ahead. So very few false negatives, and go ahead. Most of the negatives are truly negative. So what does that mean? Well, let's keep going. Okay, go to the next slide. Here's an example.
Can we just for those that weren't able to look there, can you just drive those numbers home real quick?
Yeah. So you go in for your prenatal visit and they say, we're going to offer you cell-free, DNA screening.
Mm-hmm.
And your test comes back positive for Down syndrome. What does that mean? Well, what it means is you're in a population that's at a higher risk for Down syndrome. It does not mean that your baby has Down syndrome. Only 1 out of 3 times, only 33% of the time will your baby actually have Down syndrome.
Wow. You still have a 70% chance that you just received this positive, and there's around 66% chance that your baby does not have Down syndrome.
Correct. And the problem is people are making decisions based on cell-free fetal DNA screening based on a blood test because they think that 99% sensitivity means that it's right 99% of the time, and that's not what it means at all. You have to look at the positive predictive value. Okay. So people are aborting based on a cell-free fetal DNA screening.
Based on a 1 in 3 chance. Well, they think it's a 100% chance,
correct.
And it's really just a 1 in 3.
And that's the problem. So anyway, let's go through the next one. So what if you're in that high-risk population? Okay. So let's go through what does the cell-free DNA screening mean if you're in a high-risk population? Well, that has a 1 out of 100 prevalence. So 1% of babies are born with trisomy 21. So let's go through that. It changes a little bit. You can go to the next slide. Sorry. Okay, so this is the higher risk problem. Go ahead. So you got 100 babies that really have a problem. Go ahead. And 9,900 that don't have a problem. Okay, that's in reality, that's a 1% risk of Down syndrome. So you're going to have 119 tests that say the baby has a problem and 9,881 that says the baby doesn't have a problem. Let's go. You can flip through it.
You can just fill it in.
So you've got 99 that are true positives and 20 that are false positives. Okay. So you still have this issue of false positives. Even in a high-risk setting, you've got false positives. And you're acting on a test that might not be correct.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So keep going. So, and you can see that the false negative rate also starts to get higher because in a high-risk population, this test is going to miss some babies that actually have a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so keep going. All right, so, and you can, let's pause here a minute. So in a normal population, only 1/3 of the time are positives actually true. In a high-risk population, a little more often, 80% of the time, 83%, a positive is true. But still, you've got 17% of the time, the positive is false. It's false. And we have this idea that medicine is 100% perfect. I'm a physician. I can tell you medicine is not 100% perfect. We make our best guess based on the evidence, and sometimes it's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just share with you a little bit about what we talked about at breakfast.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to use myself as a personal example. So I'm giving myself permission to share this information. My first son was diagnosed with a terrible congenital heart problem. It's the kind where babies don't live very long. So he died at 2.5. Right. With my second son, when I was pregnant, I had the ultrasound screening, which is one of those screening tests to look at my baby's heart. And yes, indeed, my second son had, by ultrasound, this congenital heart problem. And I said, I'm not going to shorten this baby's life. I love him. I'm going to take whatever amount of life God allows me to share with my son, my second son. And it was a terribly difficult pregnancy because I knew he was going to die when he was born. But I also knew that I loved him, and this was it. You know, he isn't going to have a second chance. He only has the time that he has in my womb, and then he's going to die. And he's born, and lo and behold, he did not have the congenital heart problem. Okay.
He was one of these false positives.
He was one of these false positives. So I've lived it and I've walked it, and I know it's hard, but to make the decision, give him a chance. Medicine's not perfect, and things happen all the time where we may one year not be able to treat a disease, and the next year we might. So I would just urge people to err on the side of hope and not despair, and not to prematurely decide to end a baby's life on the basis of a test that's just a test. It's not 100%. So that's what I wanted to share with you about those kinds of tests. So I think that might be the last slide. Is that? Yeah, that's the last slide.
Yeah,
so
thanks
for giving me that time to talk about this, because I think it's important. We talk about life-limiting conditions in the baby, and there's when we talk about prenatal genetic testing, you got to always ask yourself, why am I testing? What is it going to change? If I'm not going to have to make a decision about whether or not Aunt Irma comes to the delivery, if it's not going to change anything that I do, why am I testing? Because I'll tell you, it's a difficult thing to have a diagnosis like I had with my son, and to carry the pregnancy knowing that the baby is going to die. And it was wrong. Okay. But I didn't know it was going to be wrong. I still carry that. It's tough. But I would rather have walked that route and given my son the chance to prove everybody wrong than to prematurely say, this is too hard, I'm out of here. And it turns out there's a whole nother way to handle the situation where a woman is given an adverse prenatal diagnosis. So she's told there's something seriously wrong with your baby. And oftentimes in the next breath she's told, and we've scheduled your abortion for tomorrow. Ooh, slow down. Wait a minute. Slow down and wait. Let's look at what happens when you take families that have been given a diagnosis like that. Baby's going to die when he's born. Okay, it's hard. If you take families and you surround them with the kind of care that we use for any other terminally ill patient, hospice care, you surround them with something called perinatal hospice, where they have pastoral involvement, they have care, like any other hospice patient. And you walk those patients through till their baby's life ends. And you compare families that get the diagnosis and have the abortion the next day or the next week or abort. And you look long-term at the outcomes. Lo and behold, the families that have perinatal hospice have less complicated grief, more satisfaction, and less regret than the ones who aborted. Because the ones who aborted, I guarantee you, are going to run into people like me, where they were given a diagnosis and the diagnosis was wrong. And that's going to be real. That's going to take the grief, the horrible grief. And I'm not minimizing the grief that comes with losing a baby. Like I said, I've walked it. It's going to take that horrible grief and make it more complicated because now they don't know. They don't know. Whereas the families who have given the babies the chance, they've brought it to resolution. They've done what they could. They have the satisfaction of knowing I did everything that I could do and it was out of my hands. That's a comfort in a horribly hard situation.
And advocating for that is real healthcare, because advocating for that is really caring for the health of the mother, the health of the baby, the health of the father, the health of the whole situation.
The health of the whole situation, a horrible situation. I'm not minimizing it. Like I said, I walked it. It's a horrible situation, but there are things that produce more health and there are things that produce more pain. And let's go for the things that produce more health.
And that's everything AAPLOG is fighting for.
That's what we're fighting for. We care about women and we care about the human beings in their womb. Yeah,
I hope this particularly it's an eye-opener, because I don't think we would have, our family, I would have never understood that. And so I can guarantee what I would have done probably with our first and second born is we would have gone in and we probably would have done these tests. Now we would have never aborted, but the conversation we had, my wife and I, is we said, okay, well, we obviously know we're not going to abort, but if we get one of these false positives, we're going to walk through purgatory for 6 months. Like we're going to walk through this painful process of wondering what's going to come. And either it's going to come or it's not going to come.
Right.
In the result of this, we've really only got a 33% chance. But we have a 100% chance that we're going to have a very anxious 6 months. And I don't want my wife extra anxious as she's going through her second and third trimester, right? So we said, we're going to opt out of these because either way, we're going to do the same thing. And when the baby comes, the baby's going to come. And I do think you teaching on this changed our perspective there. And I think I have no idea what the test would have come up with, but I do know we ended up with healthy babies. And
it's not to minimize or to say it's wrong to get prenatal genetic testing.
Yes, thank you.
I'm not saying that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying think about how is it going to help you?
Mm-hmm.
What is it going to do? Is it going to improve your care? Are you going to be able to plan better if you get a diagnosis? Is it going to help you or is it not? And see, these tests are voluntary. You don't have to get these tests. And if they're not going to change anything that you do, then think 2 or 3 times before you decide to get the test.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
That's
thank you for
all
that
I'm saying.
clarification. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, can we talk about one more thing?
Sure.
Actually, let me check real quick. I just want to make sure because you've got a plane to catch this evening and a meeting that you have to be in the airport for. So we've got about 20 minutes or so that we can do. Can you talk about, and I'll let you can talk about whatever you want to talk about in this area, but this is certainly an area where you shifted even my thinking in some areas. The last one, you opened my eyes to things I never thought about. In this area, when I first heard you converted my perspective on some aspects in this area, right?
Okay.
And this is in the area of birth control.
Okay.
And I'll let you can speak to what you want to. You talked about L2 surges and all of the, you talked medically about the process of normal birth control, but there's so many elements, and I'll let you just speak to whatever you want to speak to.
Yeah. So, it's an important topic.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, as far as misinformation goes, one of the first things that came out after Dobbs is they're going for our pills now. Crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a masking of something that actually is happening. So there is a contraceptive on the market called Ella. Okay.
ELLA?
ELLA. The chemical name is olapristal.
Mm.
Olapristal is a second-generation drug. You know how there's first-generation antibiotics and second-generation antibiotics, and it's a derivative of another antibiotic. Well, Ella is a derivative of mifepristone, RU46. In fact, they're equally powerful at blocking progesterone, milligram for milligram. Okay, I did a publication on this years ago when Ella first came out. So Ella, so the abortion industry sought FDA approval for Ella not as an abortion drug, but as a contraceptive. Okay, so they sought approval for Ella as an emergency contraceptive. And I was at the FDA advisory committee hearing when the data was examined from the trials. Okay, and it turns out that there were some women in the trials who were found to be pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they weren't supposed to get pregnant on Ella. They were found to be pregnant, and all of the women for whom they had information miscarried. Well, that's remarkable. So at the FDA hearing,
and you said all
of them.
Yeah.
Now there's a lot of women they didn't have information on.
Yeah, but all the ones that they did have information
miscarried.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So at the FDA hearing, it came up. One of the panelists said, "Now, the elephant in the room here is, well, what happens after fertilization? I mean, this evidence looks pretty bad, and how do you explain that?" And the drug manufacturer said, "Ella works by preventing egg release." Well, that's ridiculous. Obviously, an egg was released because she's pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a no-brainer. Okay, so The fact is that Ella may, at some points in the cycle, prevent egg release. It may. And it may not. And if it doesn't, Ella produces the same kinds of effects on the woman's womb that Mifeprex does.
Wow.
Exactly the same. So it is a powerful abortion drug that is on the market. And recently, there's been a push to make contraceptives over the counter. Well, this puts a powerful abortion drug over the counter. It doesn't matter what happens to Mifeprex. Ella's out there, approved as an emergency contraceptive, but milligram for milligram, equally potent with Mifeprex for abortion.
Just under a different name.
Under a different name.
And my 15-year-old daughter, which I don't have yet, she's 3 or 4 in a couple of days, she could just go in.
If Ella's over the counter.
Hop into CVS.
That's correct.
And she could grab that.
If Ella's over the counter.
She could be 3 weeks pregnant and she could have an abortion without ever thinking about it. Well, she would think about it, but after the fact.
And that is the problem. So so the abortion industry wants to label all contraceptives as the same. Well, they're just not. They're just not all the same. You have contraceptives that may work by preventing egg release and have no other effects.
Mm-hmm.
You have contraceptives that may work by preventing egg release, but may also work later by preventing the embryo from planting in the womb.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have
after fertilization, before implantation.
Before implantation. And then you have contraceptives like Ella, which may prevent egg release and will definitely prevent implantation. And if the baby is implanted, will definitely kill the baby. Okay, so contraceptives are not all the same. And so when you have this mass hysteria, they're coming after our contraceptives. It's mass hysteria designed to keep people from thinking critically about, well, how does that contraceptive work? And how do we know, and how sure are we?
Mm-hmm.
So for somebody that cares about whether or not there's an effect after fertilization. Okay, so some people say, I don't care. As long as I don't get a positive pregnancy test, I don't care how it works. Okay? Then they're not interested to know. But for somebody who does care how it works, AAPLOG does have a guideline that we did a review of the literature, of the medical literature, looking at how different kinds of contraceptives work.
Mm-hmm.
And that's called I can't remember the number of the practice guideline, but it's one of the practice guidelines. But the name of the practice guideline is the embryocidal potential of modern hormonal contraceptives.
Mm-hmm.
And that outlines the issue. It gives a probability. If you look at different kinds of hormonal contraceptives, it depends on what kind of hormonal contraceptive, what the risk of embryo formation is likely to be.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to decide as a couple, does it matter to me whether or not I have an embryo formed in my body but hasn't implanted? Does it matter? And then you got to make your decision from there.
And speaking completely separate from AAPLOG, but just speaking as a pastor in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, and to anyone who is part of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, our public stance, I believe, I don't want to speak synod-wise, but I do want to say theologically, we would say that life begins, and we've always said this, at conception and not at implantation. So
I'm really glad you said that because, just so you know, the term conception in 1965 was formally defined as completion of implantation. So in the law, the term conception equals completion of implantation. And that's why doctors can look you straight in the face and say, this drug doesn't interfere with conception because it doesn't interfere after implantation is completed. Now, it may completely interfere after fertilization,
mm-hmm.
and it may completely interfere with implantation, but it doesn't interfere with conception because that's the completion of implantation. So the better way, the more accurate way, if I'm understanding what you want to say,
yes, please,
is fertilization.
Okay.
So we believe that life begins at sperm egg membrane fusion,
mm-hmm.
and that's That's when a zygote is formed.
Mm-hmm.
A zygote is a one-celled embryo. Mm-hmm. So you got an embryo there, one
Unique
cell.
DNA sequence.
Unique DNA from that point. That entity just keeps dividing until it dies.
Mm-hmm.
So to use the term fertilization instead of conception, even though most people,
mm-hmm.
and for hundreds of years, conception meant sperm-egg membrane fusion.
But they changed it legally in 1965.
AAPLOG definition enshrined in the law, conception is now completion of implantation. So we don't even get into that argument. Is it abortifacient? Mm-hmm. Is it not abortifacient? Because an abortion is something that happens after implantation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we talk about, is it embryocidal?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, like homicide, suicide, pesticide, embryocide. Does it kill an embryo? We're not making a comment about what the contraceptives do after implantation.
Mm-hmm.
We're commenting on the time from sperm-egg membrane fusion until implantation. What is the effect?
What's the time period there? How long from?
7 days.
7 days.
Yeah.
So from a pre-65 perspective, when you said conception, you meant 7 days earlier. From a Christian perspective, we would say life begins at fertilization, which is 7 days earlier.
Right.
And what's important for the particularly LCMS, Christian listener would be if you would agree with that stance that says life does begin at fertilization, right? When there is a unique DNA structure, that is the beginning of human life, that your doctor can say to you that there's no chance of ending life within conception, or I'm sorry,
fertilization.
After fertilization, they can say that this only affects things after conception and be meaning something different than what you're thinking in your mind.
Correct.
Okay. So I think that was the aha moment when you talked about that and said, oh, there are some, not all, right? But there are some contraceptives on the market that are designed to disrupt, or can at least disrupt, that 7-day journey from fertilization till implantation. Right. And if it affects that time period, a doctor can say to you that it won't affect anything before conception.
Right.
Yet it can affect after fertilization, which is once again where we as LCMS Christians at least, and many of the other denominations would say that's where life actually begins. So just good to have that on your radar. That was good for me to have on my radar.
Yeah, it's important because there's a lot of doublespeak that goes on. And so, what we've done at AAPLOG is just to try to avoid the doublespeak and be as scientifically accurate as possible, so that at least people are given clear information. Okay, what you do with that information is up to the person. Understanding that LCMS has a clear guideline about human life and the defense of a human being from their earliest beginnings until their end. But not to be taken in by words that have two meanings.
Yes.
And so we don't even hardly talk about conception anymore because we're aware of the double meaning of that word.
Dr. Harrison, is there anything else that you would like our listeners to know? Anything else you want to highlight before we finish?
We have really covered the gamut. Oh my goodness. I can't think of anything right offhand, but is there anything else that you want to cover?
Well, maybe we can have you back on at some point. There's certainly a lot of other things going on, and it's an ever-moving industry with different battles. And a lot of things you talked about today, I had no idea, such as Ella, for instance, right? And mail-in abortion pills. Lord have mercy. So, perhaps we'll have you back on. But we really thank you for taking the time, for flying out here. You flew out this morning. You're going to fly back out this evening. So thank you very much. And if anyone wanted to know more from you, you've highlighted a couple times, AAPLOG.org.
Yes, okay. AAPLOG.org.
And anywhere else that you would highlight or send them to learn more from you?
No, that's the best place. And the email is just info. And so someone will be monitoring that. And if it's one that needs to go to me or to Christina or to any of the other docs that are running, we'll get you an answer.
Yeah.
If possible.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Harrison, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yep. God bless.
God bless you.